The dying man grabbed Nathan Brooks by the coat and would not let go. "Take her." "Mister, I can't." "Take her." "I've got nothing. I've got a cabin and no wife, and I bury people, that's what I do out here." The man's grip tightened, blood in his teeth, and he said the thing that put Nathan Brooks on his knees in the snow. "Nathan," he said. Nathan stopped breathing, because he had never told this man his name. "You know me," and the stranger smiled and died and took the answer with him. Before we go one step further, if you love stories about promises kept buried, grief, and the families we choose, take 1 second and hit subscribe. Stay with me all the way to the end, because what's behind the locked door in that cabin will break your heart wide open. And down in the comments, tell me what city you're watching from tonight. I want to see just how far this story has traveled. Now, let's begin. 4 hours before that, Nathan Brooks turned a man away from his door. That was the thing nobody in the Boise River Valley ever believed about him, and it was the truest thing there was. He'd done it for 6 years. He'd gotten good at it. "Nathan, open up!" He didn't move. "Nathan Brooks, I can see the smoke. I ain't stupid." He opened the door about 8 inches. Del Rainey stood there with his hat in his hands and snow to his knees, 61 years old, and he'd ridden 11 miles in weather that killed men. "Del." "It's Ruth." "Del." "She's coughing blood, Nathan." His voice cracked straight down the middle. 4 days. And there's no doctor between here and Boise City. And the pass is shut. And you're the only man in this valley who's got... I've got nothing. You've got quinine. The door didn't move. "Everybody knows you've got it," Del Rainey said. "Everybody. Whole valley. You've been handing it out the back of a wagon at midnight for 4 years like it's a sin. And Hollis Tanner told me, and the widow Pell told me. And I know you left a sack of flour on the Ferris porch in November and rode off before anybody could say thank you." "That wasn't me." "Nathan." And Nathan Brooks said, "I'll bring it out." He shut the door in the man's face. Del Rainey stood in that snow for a full minute. Then he heard the back door, and by the time he got around the cabin there was a bottle sitting on a stump, and a man on a horse riding away from his own house, and Del Rainey, 61 years old. 3 days from burying his wife, shouted at his back, "Why won't you look at me?" Nathan Brooks didn't stop. He'd tell himself later he didn't hear it. He heard it. He heard it for 6 years. He found the wagon at 9 o'clock that night on the canyon road. He almost didn't. That was the thing. He was riding the high line because the low road drifts, and he'd been riding it 11 minutes, and something made him look left, and afterward he could never once say what it was. The wagon was over on its side. There was a horse dead in the traces, and there was a man in the snow, and the man was moving. Nathan Brooks got down. "Mister." Nothing. "Mister." And the man rolled over, and there was a girl in his arms. She wasn't dead. That was Nathan's first thought, and it was wrong, and it took him about 4 seconds to understand why it was wrong, and the 4 seconds went like this. She wasn't hurt, she was held. The man had her wrapped in his own coat and his own arms, and he'd been lying on top of her in the snow for God knows how long, and he had nothing on but a shirt, and his hands had gone the color of a fish. He'd given her every stitch he had. "How long?" Nathan said. The man's mouth moved. "Sir." "How long you been down?" 2 days, the man said. And Nathan Brooks said, "That's not possible." He got a hand on the man's chest, and there was a hole in it. Not a wound. A hole. Somebody had put a bullet through that man front to back, and it had been in there long enough to go bad. And Nathan Brooks had seen a lot of things in 6 years of living alone in that canyon, and he had never once seen a man live 2 days with that in him at 20 below. "Who shot you?" "Take her." "Mister, take her. I need to know who shot you." Nathan had both hands on him now. Because whoever it was is either 4 miles behind you or he's dead in that wagon, and I've got to know which one before I put a girl on a horse. He's not behind me, the man said. Then where is he? And the man said, he's in Boise City, signing papers. Be it. The girl came awake all at once. She came awake like a person who'd been fighting sleep for 2 days and lost. And she got one look at Nathan Brooks kneeling over her father, and she went for him with both hands. Get off him. Ma'am, get off him. She hit him twice in the face before he got her wrists, and she was 22 years old and about 110 pounds, and she nearly put him in the snow, and Nathan Brooks held on to her and said the only thing in his head, I'm not the one. She stopped. I'm not the one, ma'am. Look at me. Look at my hands. He let go of her. I'm not the one who shot him. Clara Morgan turned around and saw her father's face, and she made a sound that Nathan Brooks would hear in his sleep for the rest of his life. Papa? Clara. Papa, no. Clara Jane. The man's hand came up, and it took him about 4 seconds to do it. Look at me. Don't. She was holding onto his shirt with both fists. Don't you dare do the thing where you... I'm looking at you. Papa. I've been looking at you 2 days, Thomas Morgan said, and I want you to know that's the whole reason. That's the only reason a man can do this. You just look at him. Clara Morgan put her forehead on her father's chest, and Thomas Morgan lifted his eyes over the top of his daughter's head and found the stranger kneeling 3 feet away, and he said, Take her. Mister, I can't. Take her. I've got nothing, Nathan Brooks said. You understand, I've got a cabin and 40 head and no wife. And I don't, sir, I don't talk to people. I haven't sat at a table with another human being in 6 years. I turned a man away from my door 4 hours ago, and his wife's dying, and that's what I am. That's the whole man. The grip on his coat tightened. And there's a town 11 miles down that road, and there's a church in it, and there's 4 families that'd take her in an hour, and be glad about it, and I'll ride her down there myself tonight. I'll do that. I'll do that right now. No. Sir. Not the town, Thomas Morgan said. Nathan stopped. Why not the town? And the dying man said, Because the man who shot me lives in it. Nobody spoke. Say that again. Nathan, Thomas Morgan said. And Nathan Brooks went absolutely still. The wind came down that canyon, and there were 3 people on that road, and one of them was dying, and one of them was 22 years old, and one of them had just heard his own name out of the mouth of a man he had never seen before in his life. How do you know my name? Taker. How do you know my name? Nathan Brooks, Thomas Morgan said. 36. You run 40 head up the North Fork and you've been alone 6 years and you leave flour on porches at midnight and ride off before anybody can thank you. His voice was going. You put a bottle of quinine on Del Rainey's stump 4 hours ago and you wouldn't look at him. Clara Morgan lifted her head. Papa, how do you know that? I've known who you were for 11 years, Thomas Morgan said. And then he died. That was the thing. That was the whole cruelty of it, and Nathan Brooks would sit with it for 4 months. The man got out 11 words, and then his hand came off Nathan's coat, and that was all. 11 words and a hole where an answer should have been. Clara Morgan started screaming. Nathan Brooks knelt in the snow with a dead man's blood on his coat and let her. She would not leave him. That was the first hour. Nathan got the wagon canvas off and got it under the body and got the body dragged up out of the drift where the wolves wouldn't find it before spring, and the whole time Clara Morgan sat in the snow holding her father's hand. Ma'am. Nothing. Ma'am, we've got to go. Nothing. It's 20 below and dropping, and there's 4 more hours of this, and you're going to freeze to death 6 feet from your daddy, and there is no reason on God's earth. I'm not leaving him in the snow. He's dead. I know he's dead. Then, you want to know what I did? Clara Morgan turned around, and her face was destroyed. 2 days ago, on that road, I slept. She was shaking so hard she could barely say it. He was on top of me in the snow with a hole in his chest, and he had his coat around me, and I went to sleep, mister. I went to sleep on my father, for 2 days. So don't you tell me to leave him. Don't you ever tell me to leave him. Nathan Brooks stood there. And then he did a thing he had not done in 6 years. He sat down in the snow next to her. Then we'll sit, he said. They sat 40 minutes. He was talking to you, Clara said finally. Ma'am. He said your name. Yes. He said Nathan. She wasn't looking at him. He said it like he'd said it before, like he'd said it 100 times. Nathan Brooks had no answer for that. Who are you? Nobody, ma'am. He knew you. I've never seen that man before in my life, Nathan Brooks said. I swear that on everything I've got, and I want you to understand, I've got about 4 things, and I'm swearing on all of them. I have never seen your father before tonight. And Clara Morgan said, Then how'd he know about the flowers? Nathan got her on the horse at 1 in the morning, not by arguing. He'd stopped arguing around midnight when he'd figured out the only thing that would move her, and it took him 20 minutes to say it because it was the cruelest thing he'd ever said to a person. He gave you his coat. Clara didn't move. Ma'am, look at me. He gave you his coat and he laid down on top of you in 20 below with a bullet in his chest. And he did it for 2 days, and ma'am, don't. If you die out here tonight, he did it for nothing. Clara Morgan put her hands over her face. That's a terrible thing to say, she said. Yes, ma'am. That's the most terrible thing anybody's ever said to me. Yes, ma'am, Nathan Brooks said. Get on the horse. She got on the horse. She didn't say one word for 11 miles. Then about 400 yards from the cabin with the smoke in sight, she said, Mister? Ma'am? What's in Boise City? Nathan's hands went tight on the reins. What? He said the man who shot him is in Boise City, signing papers. Her voice was flat and dead and perfectly clear. What papers? And Nathan Brooks said, I don't know. Yes, you do. Ma'am, you went quiet, Clara Morgan said. On the road, when he said it. I was holding my daddy's hand and I heard your breath stop, mister, and I want to know what papers. Nathan Brooks rode about 11 seconds. There's a man, he said, comes through this country every spring, buys up mountain ground off widows and old men who can't read a survey. What's his name? Ma'am. What's his name? And Nathan Brooks said, Silas Crow. Yeah. Clara Morgan got off that horse. She got off it moving, and she went 4 steps into the snow and stopped with her back to him and put both hands on top of her head. Ma'am. Say it again. Clara. Say his name again. Silas Crow. And Clara Morgan said, He ate at our table. Nathan Brooks got down. Say that again. He ate at our table. She turned around and her whole face had come apart. 3 weeks ago, he came up the mountain in a good coat and he took his hat off in the door and he ate at our table. Mister, I cooked for him. I made him a chicken. Clara. He said he was a surveyor. She was shaking her head. He said he was doing the territorial map. He sat there for 2 hours, and he asked my father about the water, and he asked about the deed. He asked to see the deed. Did he show it to him? Clara Morgan stopped. Clara, did your father show that man the deed? And Clara Morgan said, he gave him the original. Nobody said anything for a long moment. Why? Nathan said. Because he asked. Clara, Because a man came up our mountain and took his hat off and said he was from the government, and my father was 58 years old, and he'd been on that ground since 64, and he was proud of it, mister." Her voice broke into pieces. He was proud. He went and got it out of the box, and he laid it on the table, and he said, "There she is. That's my whole life." And that man wrote in a book for about 11 minutes, and then he folded up my father's deed and put it in his coat and said he'd bring it back Thursday. Nathan Brooks closed his eyes. And Thursday. Nobody came Thursday. And then 2 men came on the 9th, Clara Morgan said, with a paper that said we were squatting. He put her in the cabin at 2 in the morning, and he did not go in with her. He stood at the door. "There's a fire. There's meat in the box. There's a bed through there, and it's got a quilt on it." "Where are you going?" "Barn." Clara Morgan turned around. "It's 20 below. There's a stove in it." "Mr. Ma'am?" Nathan Brooks had his hat in both hands, and he was looking at the floor. "There has not been a woman in this house in 6 years, and I'm not. I want you to understand what I am. I'm not being kind. I'm not being decent. I'm not one of those." His jaw worked. "I can't sleep in here with you in it. That's all. That's the whole reason, and it's not a good one, and I'd take it as a kindness if you didn't ask me again." He went out. Clara Morgan stood in the stranger's cabin at 2 in the morning with her father's blood on her dress, and she said out loud to nobody, "He knew you." She found the door on the 3rd day, not by snooping. That's the part that mattered to her later when everybody in the valley had an opinion about it. She wasn't snooping. She was cold, and she was looking for a blanket, and there were 4 doors in that cabin, and 3 of them opened. The 4th had a padlock on it, on the inside. Clara Morgan stood in that hallway with a lamp and looked at a padlock hanging on the inside of a door in a house 11 miles from another human being, and the arithmetic of that went through her like a nail. You don't lock a door from the inside to keep people out. You lock it to keep yourself from going in. She didn't ask him about it. That was the thing. She didn't ask him about it for 4 weeks, and Nathan Brooks never once knew she'd seen it. And when he finally found out 3 months later, on the worst day of both their lives, the thing that put him on the floor wasn't that she'd found it. It was that she'd known for 4 weeks and let him keep it. "Ken, you're not eating." Nathan looked up. 11 days in. She'd been cooking for 4 of them because he'd left the kitchen alone for 6 years, and she'd said, "Mister, there's 100 pounds of flour in there going to Weevil's," and he'd said, "Do what you want," and she had. "I ate." "You took the plate outside," Clara Morgan said. "You've taken it outside 11 days in a row. You take the plate out to the barn, and you come back, and you put it in the water, and you don't say one word, and I'm going to say something, and you're going to hate it. Ma'am, you've never once sat at that table." Nathan Brooks stood in his own kitchen with his hat in his hands. "No." "Why?" "Ma'am, there's a chair there," Clara Morgan said. "There's 2 chairs, and there's 1 man in this house, and there's been 1 man for 6 years, so why in God's name are there 2 chairs at that table?" Nathan Brooks did not answer. He put his hat on and went out. And Clara Morgan stood in that kitchen and understood all at once with absolute clarity that she had just done something terrible without meaning to. She followed him at midnight on the 14th day. He'd gone out at 11, and he'd taken the wagon, and she'd been 11 days in that house, listening to a man come and go in the dark, and she got on his 2nd horse, and she went after him, and she was 3 miles down that road before she was sure she wasn't dreaming. He stopped at a place she'd never seen. He got down. He took a sack out of the wagon bed, and he carried it up to a porch, and he set it down, and he stood there for about 4 seconds. And then he knocked, 1 time, and ran. Clara Morgan sat on a horse in the dark, and watched a grown man knock on a door and run away from it like a boy. And she had her hand over her mouth, and she watched a woman open that door, and look at a sack of flour, and start to cry. She heard the woman say it, right out into the dark, to nobody, the way you'd talk to God. "Thank you." And she heard Nathan Brooks 40 yards away, behind a tree in the snow, not answering. "Why won't you let them thank you?" He nearly came out of his skin. "Jesus! Answer me. You followed me. I followed you." Clara Morgan came out of the dark. 14 days I've been in your house, and you won't sit at your own table. And you go out at midnight and come back at 4, and you lied to Del Rainey about the quinine. How do you know about Del Rainey? Because his wife's alive, Clara said. Because she's alive, mister, and she was 4 days from dead, and everybody in this valley knows there's a man out here with a bottle. And I've been to town twice, and both times somebody looked at me and said, "You're the one staying with Brooks." And then they got real quiet. Nathan Brooks stood in the snow. "Go back to the house." "No." "Clara, why won't you let them thank you?" And Nathan Brooks said, "Because then they'd know me." That was the first crack. Clara Morgan heard it, and she was smart enough not to push it, and she'd think about that decision for the rest of her life, because if she'd pushed it that night, everything after would have gone different. "Nathan, don't. That's your name." "Ma'am, you've been mister for 14 days and I'm done." She came 4 steps closer. "My father knew your name. He said it in the snow with a hole in his chest, and it was the second to last thing he ever said in his life. And I have been 14 days in your house trying to figure out how, and I want you to tell me something." "I don't know how." "That's not what I want." "Then what?" And Clara Morgan said, "I want you to say his." Nathan Brooks stopped. "What?" "His name. Say my father's name." "Ma'am, I don't know your—" "Thomas Morgan," Clara said. "Thomas Amos Morgan. He was 58. He was born in Kentucky, and he came out in 64, and he had 1 daughter, and he could not carry a tune, and he cried at weddings. Mister, he cried at every wedding in that valley for 19 years. He'd stand in the back and cry like a baby." Her voice went. "And I buried him under a wagon canvas 11 days ago, and I have not said his name out loud one time since." Clara Morgan said, "Because there's nobody in this house who'll say it back." Nathan Brooks stood in the snow for a long time, and then he said, "Thomas Morgan." Clara Morgan put her face in her hands. "Say it again." "Clara." "Say it again." "Thomas Morgan," Nathan Brooks said. And she cried standing up 40 yards from a stranger's porch in the dark, and Nathan Brooks did not touch her, and did not leave, and did not say one word, and he stood there the whole time, which was 11 minutes. That was the first thing he ever gave her. The name came out of the mountain on the 22nd day. Hollis Tanner rode up on a Tuesday, and he was 70 years old, and he had a jaw like a fence post, and he did not get off his horse. "Brooks." "Hollis." "That the Morgan girl?" Nathan didn't answer. "'Cause there's a fella in Boise City." Hollis Tanner said, "Been telling people the Morgan girl's dead." Clara Morgan came off that porch. "Say that again." "Ma'am, say it again." Hollis Tanner looked at her a long moment. "He filed a paper on the 9th, he said. Land office. Says the claimants are deceased and the ground's abandoned, and he's got a purchase deed dated the 4th. And ma'am, I'm real sorry, he's got your daddy's original with your daddy's own hand on the back of it." Clara Morgan said, "That's not possible." "Ma'am." "He was alive on the 9th, she said. "He was alive on the 11th, mister. I was holding him. I was—" She stopped. She put her hand on the rail. "He signed it." Nobody spoke. "He signed the back of his own deed," Clara Morgan said. "Silas Crow sat at our table and asked to see it, and my father went and got it, and Crow said he said—" She couldn't get it out. "He said what, ma'am?" Hollis said. And Clara Morgan said, "He said, Mr. Morgan, would you sign the back so I know it's the true copy?" Bien. Nathan Brooks turned around and walked into his own barn and did not come out for an hour. Hollis Tanner watched him go. "Ma'am, don't." "Ma'am, I've known that man 11 years, Hollis Tanner said. "And I want to tell you something because I don't think anybody else will." Clara Morgan wiped her face. "What?" "He's not in there being cold at you," Hollis said. He's in there doing arithmetic. What arithmetic? And Hollis Tanner said, about what he can afford to care about.
Johnny Hig.
He came out at dusk, and he'd made a decision, and it was the wrong one. There's a stage Thursday. Clara Morgan looked up. What? Boise City to Salt Lake. Thursday, 11 o'clock. I'll put you on it. He wasn't looking at her. I've got $140. It's yours. There's people in Salt Lake, there's work, there's a whole city, and there's not one man in it who's ever heard the name Morgan. You're getting rid of me. I'm getting you out. You're getting rid of me. Clara Morgan was on her feet. 22 days, and a man knocks on your door with a name, and you've got me on a stage by Thursday. That man will kill you. Let him try. He already did. The whole valley went quiet. Nathan Brooks stood in his own yard shaking. He already did, he said. Clara, he already did. He put a bullet in your daddy front to back on a road in December, and he did it knowing you were in that wagon, and your father drove 11 miles with a hole in his chest and then laid down in the snow on top of you for 2 days. And ma'am, do you understand why? Because he loved me. Because he was hiding you, Nathan Brooks said. Clara Morgan's hand went to her mouth. He wasn't keeping you warm, Nathan said. God forgive me. He was keeping you out of sight. Because if Silas Crow rode back up that road and found one body, he's got a dead squatter, and if he finds two, he's got a paper problem, and if he finds one and a girl he can't find. He stopped. He goes and files that you're dead, Clara Morgan said. He goes and files that you're dead, Nathan Brooks agreed. And your daddy knew that. Ma'am, your daddy figured that out with a bullet in his chest at 20 below in the dark, and then he laid down on you, and he did not move for 2 days, and he wasn't dying of that hole, Clara. He was dying of cold. He gave you his coat. Clara Morgan sat down on the porch step. He knew he was going to die. He knew it 11 miles back. Then why'd he drive? Her voice was in pieces. Why'd he drive 11 miles, Nathan? Why not stop? Why not? He could have stopped anywhere. There's houses. There's the Ferris place. And there's Del Rainey. And there's the church. And Nathan Brooks said very slowly, say that again. What? He drove past them, Nathan said. He'd gone gray. Clara. He drove past the Ferris place. He drove past Rainey's. He drove past 4 houses on that road, and every one of them's got a lamp in the window, and he had a bullet in his chest, and his daughter in the wagon. Nathan. He was on the Canyon Road, Nathan Brooks said. Clara, nobody's on the Canyon Road in December. That road goes one place. Clara Morgan stood up. Where does it go? And Nathan Brooks said, here. Jar. Nobody spoke. The wind came off that mountain, and 2 people stood in a yard 11 miles from anything, and neither one of them could make a sound. He was coming here, Clara said. Yes. He drove 11 miles with a hole in his chest, past 4 houses that would have taken him in. Yes. To get to a man who lives alone in a canyon and won't let anybody thank him. Yes, Nathan Brooks said. Clara Morgan put both hands on her head. Why? I don't know. Nathan, I don't know. It came out of him like something tearing, and it was the first time she'd ever heard him raise his voice. You think I haven't 22 days, ma'am? I have been 22 days on that road. I've been out there 4 times. I went out there in the dark and stood where he went down, and I have been trying to figure out how a man I never met knew my name, and knew about the flower, and knew about Del Rainey's stump 4 hours before he died. He stopped. He put his hand over his mouth. Clara Morgan said, Nathan, 4 hours. Nathan Brooks said, Nathan what? He knew about the quinine, Nathan said. He knew I put a bottle on Del Rainey's stump. Clara, that was 4 hours before I found him. 4 hours. He was already on that road. He was already shot. He was already lying in the snow with you when I did it. Clara Morgan's face went white. Then how? He couldn't have known, Nathan Brooks said. There's not a man alive who could have known that. He got the lamp, and he got a shovel, and he went out at midnight, and Clara Morgan went with him, and neither one of them said a word for 11 miles. They dug her father out at 2 in the morning. That's the part nobody in that valley ever heard about, and they'd both take it to their graves, a man and a woman on a canyon road in the middle of the night in December with a lamp and a shovel and a canvas. Nathan, his coat. What? Ma'am, where's his coat? Clara Morgan stopped. It's on me. Take it off. She took it off. Nathan Brooks went through that coat by lamplight in 20 below, and his hands were shaking so bad he dropped it twice, and there was nothing in it. There was a pipe, and there was 11 cents, and there was a piece of string, and there was a pocket sewn shut. Clara Morgan said, "That's not his." "Ma'am, that's not I made that coat." She had her hands in it now. "I made it in 79. There's no pocket there. Nathan, there's no pocket. I know every stitch in that coat." "Somebody put one in." "Who?" "He did," Nathan Brooks said. "He cut it open. There was one thing in it. It was a piece of paper folded 4 times, and it had been folded and unfolded so many times it had gone soft as cloth, and Nathan Brooks opened it by lamplight next to a dead man's grave. It was a letter. It was 11 years old, and it was in his own handwriting. Nathan Brooks made a sound like he'd been hit. He went down on one knee in the snow. "Nathan." He couldn't speak. "Nathan." Clara Morgan had both hands on him. "Nathan, what is it? What? Talk to me, talk to me." "I wrote this," Nathan Brooks said. "What?" "I wrote this." He was shaking. "Clara, I wrote this. 11 years ago, 1871. I wrote this, and I put it in a Bible, and I gave it to a man on a road outside Boise City, and I never—" He stopped. He put the letter against his chest. "Ma'am," Nathan Brooks said, "what did your father do in 1871? And Clara Morgan said he had a failed harvest. Nathan Brooks looked up at her. "He lost everything," Clara said slowly. "The whole crop, in 71. He never talked about it. He said a man gave him a Bible." The lamp guttered. "He said a man gave him a Bible on a road, and it had money in it," Clara Morgan said, "and he spent 19 years looking for him." And 19 years is a long time to look for a man who was 11 miles up a canyon the whole time. Nathan Brooks knelt in that snow with the letter against his chest and said no. "Nathan, no, ma'am, that's not—" He was shaking his head. "That's not what happened. That's not what happened. I didn't give anybody a Bible. That's a story. Somebody told your daddy a story." "He had it," Clara Morgan said. "Ma'am, he had it, Nathan." Her voice was going. "It was on the shelf, my whole life. It's been on the shelf my whole life, and he never once opened it, and I asked him why, and he said—" She stopped. "He said what Nathan said, and Clara Morgan said, he said because there's a man's whole heart in there, and it isn't mine to read." Nathan Brooks put his forehead down on his own knee in the snow. "Where is it?" he said. "What, the Bible, Clara? Where is it?" "It's on the shelf." "Which shelf?" And Clara Morgan said, "In the cabin, on the mountain, in my father's house." Nathan Brooks looked up. The house Silas Crow filed on. "Dad." She got him back to the ranch at 4 in the morning, and he did not sleep, and neither did she. And at 6 o'clock she came out on the porch, and Nathan Brooks was sitting on the step with a letter in his hands, and he had not moved in 2 hours. "Nathan, I'm not going to read it to you." "I didn't ask." "You're going to." "I'm not going to ask." Clara Morgan said, "Because it's yours, and because you wrote it 11 years ago, and my father carried it in a pocket. He sewed himself, and neither one of you ever said a word about it to a living soul, and I'm 22 years old, but I'm not a fool, mister." Nathan Brooks looked up at her. "Then why are you out here?" And Clara Morgan said, "Because you've been sitting on a step for 2 hours, and it's 20 below, and somebody ought to be." She sat down. She didn't say anything. They sat there 40 minutes, and the sun came up, and Nathan Brooks folded that letter and put it in his shirt and said, "It's a suicide note." Clara Morgan did not move. "Nathan, it's a suicide note, ma'am. That's what it is. That's what I wrote in 1871, and that's what I put in that Bible, and I want you to hear the whole thing before you say anything at all." "Okay. My wife died in March," Nathan Brooks said. "March the 4th, 1871, and my boy died the 9th, 5 days apart. And it was the diphtheria, and there were 9 houses in that valley, and it took 11 people, and 4 of them were children." Clara Morgan put her hand over her mouth. "And I put 'em in the ground myself, because there wasn't anybody else standing," Nathan said. "And I sat in that house for 6 weeks. And in April, I wrote that letter. And I got on a horse, and I rode down toward Boise City with a Bible with a letter in it, and about $140, because I didn't want anybody to have to pay for it, ma'am. That was the whole, I'd seen what it costs to bury somebody, and I wanted the money right there where they'd find it." Nobody spoke. "And then there was a man on the road," Nathan Brooks said. "He was sitting on a wagon," he said. "Just sitting there, middle of the road. And I came up on him and I said, 'Mister, you're in the road,' and he didn't move." Clara Morgan was crying, and she wasn't making a sound. "And I got down. And I said, 'Mister, what's the matter with you?' And he looked at me and he said—" Nathan Brooks stopped. "He said what?" Clara whispered. "He said I lost the whole crop." Clara Morgan put both hands over her face. "He said I lost the whole crop, and I've got a girl at home, and I've been sitting in this road 4 hours because I can't figure out how to drive up that mountain and tell her." Nathan's voice was gone. "And ma'am, I want you to understand where I was. I want you to understand what was in my saddlebag." "Nathan, I had a Bible with a note in it," Nathan Brooks said. "And I was on my way to a place I'd picked out. And a man in a road told me he couldn't figure out how to tell his little girl." He put his hands over his eyes. "So I gave it to him," he said. Nobody spoke for a long moment. "You gave him the money," Clara said. "I gave him the Bible." "Nathan, I gave him the whole thing, ma'am. Bible, note, money. I put it in his hands, and I said there's $140 in there, and I got on my horse, and I rode off, and I never looked back, and I have not thought about that man in 11 years. You forgot. I didn't forget." "Then, I never knew," Nathan Brooks said. "Clara, I didn't ask his name. I didn't ask where he lived. I gave a stranger a Bible in a road because I was about to go do a thing, and I didn't want to carry it with me, and that's the ugly truth of it, ma'am, and I have never said it out loud to a living soul." "That's not ugly. It wasn't charity," Nathan Brooks said. "That's what I'm trying to tell you, and nobody ever lets me finish it. It wasn't kindness. I wasn't being good. I was throwing it away. I was a man cleaning out his pockets on his way to the river, and there happened to be somebody standing there." And Clara Morgan said, "So why didn't you go?" Nathan Brooks stopped. "What?" "You cleaned out your pockets," Clara Morgan said. "You gave away everything you had. You were on your way, so why are you sitting on this step 11 years later?" Nathan Brooks did not answer. "Nathan?" "Ma'am, why didn't you go?" And Nathan Brooks said, "Because he said thank you." Clara Morgan made a sound. "He grabbed my hand," Nathan said. "That's all. He grabbed my hand, and he didn't let go, and he said thank you about 9 times, and he was crying, ma'am. This grown man in a road, and I couldn't get loose. I stood there about 4 minutes, trying to get my hand back from a stranger." "Nathan?" "And I got on my horse, and I rode about 2 miles, Nathan Brooks said, "and I stopped, and I sat there, and I thought, well, hell, I've got nothing left to leave anybody." He wiped his face with the back of his wrist. "That's it," he said. "That's the whole thing. That's the entire reason I'm alive, Clara, and it's the stupidest thing I ever heard in my life. I didn't have any money left to put in the note, so I went home to get some." Clara Morgan sat on that step and could not speak. And by the time I got home, it was dark, Nathan said, and I was tired. And I slept. And in the morning, there was a cow calving. Nathan. And that's it, he said. That's all it ever was. There was a cow calving, and then there was a fence down, and then it was May, and then it was 11 years. He stood up. So don't you sit there and tell me your daddy owed me anything, Nathan Brooks said. Ma'am, I've owed him 11 years. He didn't take my money. He took my note out of my hands, and he didn't know it, and I have been paying that back with flour in the dark ever since, and I never once knew his name, and now he's in the ground on a canyon road, and I still don't know how he knew mine. They found out 4 days later, and it was Hollis Tanner who told them, and he told them in the worst possible way, which was by accident. He rode up on a Saturday with a sack of mail. Brooks? Hollis. You got a letter. Nathan Brooks stopped dead in his own yard. I what? You got a letter. Hollis Tanner held it out. First one in 11 years, I'd guess. Postmaster asked me to bring it 'cause he ain't riding up this canyon in December, and I told him he was a coward. Nathan didn't take it. Who's it from? How in the hell would I know? Hollis. Take the damn letter, Nathan. He took it. He looked at the front of it, and Nathan Brooks said in a voice with nothing in it at all, That's a dead man's hand. Clara Morgan came off that porch. What? That's your daddy's hand. Let me see it. Clara, let me see it. She snatched it out of his hands and looked at it, and she went down on her knees in the snow. That's Papa. Clara, that's Papa. That's his. He does the M like that. He does the M like that. He's done it my whole... She looked at the corner. Nathan, she said. It's postmarked the 8th. Nobody breathed. He was shot on the 9th, Clara Morgan said. Nathan Brooks took that letter into the barn, and he was in there 40 minutes, and Hollis Tanner sat on his horse the whole time and would not leave, and when Nathan came out, his face was destroyed. Hollis. Yeah. How long you known me? 11 years. You ever tell anybody about me? Hollis Tanner said. What kind of question is that? Have you ever told anybody about me? And Hollis Tanner said, Son, I've told everybody in this territory about you. Nathan Brooks stood in his own yard. What? You think that's a secret? Hollis Tanner got down off that horse for the first time in 11 years. Nathan, the flour, the quinine, the firewood on the Pell place, the Ferris girl's shoes. That wasn't. That was you, and everybody knows it was you, and everybody's always known it was you. Hollis was shouting now. You think you're invisible. You think a man can ride around this valley at midnight for 11 years and nobody notices. Son, there are 40 families on this mountain, and every single one of them knows exactly who you are, and the only thing anybody's ever asked me about you is, why won't he let us say thank you? Nathan Brooks couldn't speak, and I always tell him the same thing, Hollis Tanner said. What? I say because he thinks he's got no business being alive. Nathan Brooks sat down on his own porch step. Hollis? And you want to know how Tom Morgan knew your name? Hollis Tanner said. 'Cause I told him. The whole yard went silent. Clara Morgan stood up very slowly. What did you say, Ma'am? Ma'am? Hollis Tanner had his hat off now, and he was 70 years old, and he looked like a man walking to the gallows. I've known your daddy 19 years. You? I knew him before I knew him. He pointed at Nathan. Tom Morgan's been coming down off that mountain to my place every spring since 72, and every single spring for 19 years, that man has asked me the same question. What question? And Hollis Tanner said, Hollis, have you found him yet? Clara Morgan sat down in the snow. You knew, she said. Ma'am, you knew. She was shaking. 19 years. My father spent 19 years looking for a man on a road, and you knew who it was. I figured it out in 80, Hollis Tanner said. 2 years ago. Ma'am, listen. You've known for 2 years. I've known for 2 years, Hollis Tanner said, and I never told him, and I want you both to hear why, and then you can do what you like with me. Nobody moved. Tom told me the story every spring for 9 years, Hollis said. Same story. A man on a road with a Bible. And he'd tell it, and he'd cry, and I'd pour him a drink, and that was that. And in 80 he told it again, and he said one thing different. What? Nathan said. He said there was a note in it. Nathan Brooks went white. He never read it, Hollis Tanner said. 19 years Nathan and that man never read one word of it, but he found it. About a week after. He opened that Bible looking for the money, and there it was, and ma'am, he read the first line. Clara Morgan couldn't breathe. What's the first line? She said. And Hollis Tanner looked at Nathan Brooks. Son, he said, you want to tell her, or you want me to? Nathan Brooks took the letter out of his shirt. He looked at it a long moment. And then he read the first line out loud in his own yard for the first time in 11 years. To whoever finds me, my wife's name was Sarah, and my boy's name was Sam. And I would like them said out loud at least once more, before I'm forgotten. Clara Morgan put both hands over her mouth. Hollis Tanner said, That's the line. Hollis. That's the line, Nathan, Hollis Tanner said, and his voice went to pieces. That's the line that man carried for 19 years. He read 4 words of a dead man's suicide note, and he shut that Bible, and he never opened it again, and he put it on a shelf. And every spring for 19 years, he came down off that mountain and asked me if I'd found the man who wrote it. Why? Because he wanted to say I'm back, Hollis Tanner shouted. The yard went absolutely silent. That's it, Hollis said. That's the whole thing. 19 years. He didn't want to pay you back. He didn't want to thank you. He never once said the word money to me in 19 years. He was crying openly. He wanted to find you and say Sarah and Sam out loud so you'd know somebody had. Nathan Brooks put his face in his hands. And in 80, son, Hollis Tanner said, he told me the names. And I'd been sitting in a chair across from you for 8 years, listening to you not say 2 names, and I put it together in about 4 seconds. And you didn't tell him? Clara said. No, ma'am. Why? And Hollis Tanner said, because he'd have come. Clara Morgan stood up. That's not a reason. He'd have come up that canyon the same day, ma'am, and he'd have knocked on that door, and Nathan Brooks would have opened it about 8 inches and said, I've got nothing, and shut it in his face. Hollis Tanner's jaw was working. Same as he did to Del Rainey. Same as he's done to every soul on this mountain for 11 years. Hollis, and I'd have lost 'em both, Hollis Tanner said. That's the arithmetic. That's what I've been doing for 2 years, ma'am, every single night in my own bed. Tom Morgan gets a door shut in his face and dies not knowing, or Tom Morgan gets a door shut in his face and Nathan dies of it. Nathan Brooks looked up. What? And Hollis Tanner said, Son, I've read your face for 11 years. You'd have gone in that barn and not come out. Barn. Nathan Brooks stood up and walked into his house and shut the door. Clara Morgan stood in that yard with a 70-year-old man and a letter and a horse, and nobody said anything for a long minute. Mr. Tanner. Ma'am. You were wrong. Yes, ma'am. You were wrong, Clara Morgan said, and her voice was shaking. You had it backwards. You had it backwards for 2 years, and my father's in the ground on a canyon road, and he never got to say it. Yes, ma'am. He'd have opened the door. Ma'am. He'd have opened the door, Mr. Tanner. She was crying and furious. Not for a stranger, not for a neighbor, not for a man who wanted to thank him. But you put Thomas Morgan on that porch, and he says Sarah out loud, and that man opens the door in 9 seconds. And you have known him 11 years, and you didn't know that. Hollis Tanner stood in that yard. No, ma'am, he said. I didn't. And then he said, "So how'd he know?" Clara stopped. "What?" "Ma'am, that letter's postmarked the 8th. Hollis Tanner's face had gone strange. "And that man was on the canyon road on the 9th, headed for this house, and he knew Nathan's name, and he knew about Del Rainey's stump 4 hours before it happened, and I never told him one word." Clara Morgan said, "Then who did?" Nathan Brooks came out of that house 40 minutes later with the letter in his hand, and he'd opened it. His own letter. The one from the coat. He'd read all 11 years of it, and his hands were steady for the first time in 4 days. Hollis. "Son, read this." Nathan. "Read it, Hollis." Hollis Tanner took the second letter. The new one. The one with a dead man's handwriting on the front and a postmark from the 8th. He read it, and Hollis Tanner, 70 years old, sat down on Nathan Brooks's porch step and said, "Oh my God." "Read it out loud," Clara said. "Ma'am?" "Read it out loud, Mr. Tanner." Hollis Tanner read Thomas Morgan's last letter out loud in that yard. "Mr. Brooks, I am told your name is Nathan and that you live up the canyon and that you have been leaving flour on porches for 11 years. I am told you will not open the door. I am 58 years old and I have been looking for you since 1871, and I have run out of patience with being told." Clara Morgan had her hand over her mouth. "I am coming Tuesday. I will bring your Bible. I have not read past the first line and I never will. I am bringing my daughter because I want you to meet her and because I want to be able to say I did it in front of somebody and because I am not sure I can get through it alone." Hollis Tanner's voice broke. "Sarah," he read. "Sam. There. I have said them and I will say them again on your step Tuesday. Yours, Thomas Morgan." Nobody spoke. The wind came off that mountain and there were 3 people in a yard and not one of them could make a sound. "He mailed it on the 8th, Clara Morgan said. "Yes." "He was coming Tuesday." "Yes." "He was shot on the 9th, Clara Morgan said. "He was shot the day after he mailed this." "He was Nathan. He wasn't fleeing. Everybody's been saying he was fleeing. I've been saying he was fleeing. He was fleeing. Land speculators. That's what I've said for 26 days. "He said." She stopped. "Clara." "He was going to your house," Clara Morgan said. "Nathan. He wasn't running from anybody. He put on his good coat and he got the Bible off the shelf and he woke me up at 4 in the morning and he said, 'Put on your dress, we're going visiting.' And I said, 'Where?' And he wouldn't tell me." Nathan Brooks said, "He wouldn't tell you." "He wouldn't tell me," Clara Morgan said. 26 days I've been thinking my there and took it and he did not defend himself, and that was somehow worse. "Ma'am," he said finally, "I've been doing this 4 years, and you're the first one who's ever said it to my face. Get out. Miss Morgan, get out of this house." And Silas Crow said, "Who's Sarah?" Nathan Brooks came out of that chair so fast it went over backward. He had Silas Crow by the coat and up against the wall of his own kitchen before Clara Morgan could get a hand on him, and Silas Crow did not fight and did not raise a hand and did not blink. "Where'd you hear that name?" "Mr. Brooks." "Where did you hear that name?" "Somebody said it to me," Silas Crow said, "in a hotel in Boise City on the 16th of December, and he said it like it was a joke, sir, and I have not slept right since." Nathan Brooks let him go. Silas Crow straightened his coat. "Sit down," Nathan said. "There's a man," Silas Crow said. "I don't know his name. I've seen him 4 times in 4 years, and every time he's in a different coat." Crow. "He came to my room on the 16th, Crow said. "Knocked at 11 at night. I'd never seen him before. I want to be clear, I'd never seen him. And he sat down in my chair like he owned it and he said, 'Mr. Crow, that Morgan file's a mess and I've cleaned it up for you.'" Clara Morgan sat down. "And I said, 'What mess?' Silas Crow said. And he said the old man's dead, and there's a certificate on file and you're welcome. Nobody breathed. And I said I didn't ask for that, Crow said. And I want you both to know that's exactly what I said, and I said it in a hotel room at 11 at night to a man I'd never seen, and he laughed at me. What did he say? Nathan said, and Silas Crow said, he said, nobody ever asks. Nathan Brooks put both hands on that table. Say that again. He said nobody ever asks, Silas Crow said, and Mr. Brooks, that's when I understood I'd been working for somebody for 4 years, and I never once knew it. Crow, I thought I was in business for myself, Silas Crow said, and his voice cracked, and it was the first crack in him. 4 years, 31 ranches. I thought I was a clever man who'd read the back of a deed, and I have been carrying it, sir. I've been carrying it since 78. I don't sleep. I don't have a wife. I go up a mountain and I take my hat off, and I ask a good man to sign a piece of paper, and I ride down, and I think, well, Silas, you're a bastard, but you're your own bastard. He put his face in his hands. And a man in a hotel room told me I've been a tool for 4 years, Silas Crow said, and I never even knew whose. Clara Morgan said. Then who is he? I don't know. You've seen him 4 times. Ma'am, I've seen a coat 4 times. Silas Crow looked up. Different coat every time, different hat. He's about 60. He's got a good hand, he writes beautiful. I've seen him write, and he's never once told me a name, and I never once asked, because it never occurred to me that I should, because he never asked me for anything. He never asked you for anything. Not once in 4 years, Silas Crow said. Nathan Brooks said very quietly, then what did he do? And Silas Crow said, he gave me things. The kitchen went silent. He gave me the idea, Crow said. 1878, Boise City. I was a clerk in the land office making $40 a month, and I was reading a deed, and a man leaned over my shoulder and said, did you know what's on the back of that? Nathan Brooks had gone very still. And I said no. Silas Crow said, and he showed me, and he said, isn't that something? And he walked off. And I sat there for about 4 hours, and then I quit my job. That's it. That's it. He never asked me for $1, Silas Crow said. 4 years, 31 ranches, not $1, not one favor, not one word. He shows up, every year or so, and he's pleasant. Mr. Brooks, he's the most pleasant man I've ever met in my life, and he tells me something useful and he leaves. And I've spent 4 years thinking I had a friend in the business. And Nathan Brooks said, you don't have a friend, you've got a rope. Silas Crow looked up. What tool? He didn't give you an idea, Nathan Brooks said. He gave you a hook and you swallowed it in 1878, and you've been carrying it around for 4 years thinking it was yours. Mr. Brooks, how much have you made? Silas Crow blinked. How much, Crow? 31 ranches in 4 years. What's that worth? About $9,000. And what's the ground worth? Silas Crow did not answer. What's the ground worth? And Silas Crow said, I don't know. Yes, you do. I don't. You're a landman, Nathan Brooks said. You've been a landman 11 years. You know exactly what 31 mountain sections are worth, and I want you to say the number out loud in my kitchen. Silas Crow sat there. $400,000, he said. Nobody moved. You sold $400,000 for 9, Nathan Brooks said. Who bought it? Crow. Yank. Silas Crow went white. What? You've got 31 deeds, Nathan Brooks said. Where are they? I sold them. To who? To. He stopped. To an agent. What agent? Cheyenne. There's a firm in Cheyenne. What's it called? And Silas Crow said, it hasn't got a name. Clara Morgan stood up. What? It hasn't got a name, Silas Crow said, and his voice was climbing. There's a number. It's a number and a bank draft, and it comes on the Tuesday train, and I've been cashing them 4 years, and I have never—" He stopped dead. "Oh, God," he said. "Say it," Nathan said. "I've never met anybody," Silas Crow whispered. 4 years, 31 ranches, $400,000 of ground, and I have never met one single person on the other end of it. Nathan Brooks sat down. "Mr. Crow?" "Sir, why'd you come here?" Silas Crow looked up. "What?" "You've got a legal deed. You've got a recorded conveyance. You've got everything you came for, and you had it on the 11th of December. Nathan Brooks's voice was very calm. "So why'd you ride 11 miles up a canyon in January to sit in the kitchen of a man who'd be pleased to kill you?" Silas Crow did not answer. Crow. "Because of the name," he said. "What name?" And Silas Crow said, "Sarah." Nobody breathed. "He said it in the hotel room," Crow said, "on the 16th, after he told me about the certificate. He was putting his hat on, and he stopped at the door and he said, 'By the way, you ever hear of a fellow up the canyon named Brooks?' Nathan Brooks did not move. And I said no," Silas Crow said. "And he said, 'Well, you will. He's the one leaves the flower.' And then he laughed, and he said—" He stopped. "Say it," Clara Morgan said. "He said ask him about Sarah and Sam." "Jasam." Nathan Brooks put both hands over his face. "Nathan, he's read it," Nathan Brooks said. "Nathan, he's read the note, Clara." His voice was gone. "He's got that Bible, and he's read every word of it, and he's been reading it for a month, and he told a stranger in a hotel room to ask me about my wife like it was a joke." "Mr. Brooks," Silas Crow said, "who's Sarah?" And Nathan Brooks said, "My wife." The kitchen went absolutely quiet. "She's been dead 11 years, Nathan Brooks said. "And Sam was 4. And there's 2 graves out that window, and I've got a room in this house I haven't opened in 11 years, and Mr. Crow, there are exactly 2 people alive who knew those names before December, and one of them's Hollis Tanner, and one of them's me, and the man in your hotel room is neither one." Silas Crow said, "Then how'd he get them?" And Clara Morgan said, "Out of my father's wagon." Nathan Brooks stood up. "Clara, he took the Bible." She was on her feet too. "That's it. That's the whole thing. That's the arithmetic, Nathan. He walked up on my father in the snow, and he took that Bible out of the box under the seat, and it had a note in it with 2 names on it, and he's been reading it for a month." "Ma'am," Silas Crow said, "what Bible? Shut up." "Miss Morgan." "Shut up, Mr. Crow. I'm not talking to you." "Ma'am, I'm going to hang for this," Silas Crow said. She stopped. "There's a false certificate on my file in the Territorial Land Office," he said. "In my file, with my name 4 inches from it. And I have spent 3 weeks in a hotel room in Boise City doing arithmetic, and here's where I came out the day anybody in this territory looks at that paper I hang. Not him, me. Because he's a coat, ma'am, and I'm a name on 31 deeds." Clara Morgan sat down. "So yes," Silas Crow said, "I'd like to know what Bible." Nathan Brooks looked at him a long moment. "Clara?" "Nathan, no." "Clara, get the letter." "No." "Ma'am, he killed my father." "He didn't kill your father," Nathan Brooks said. The room went silent. "Nathan, he didn't, Clara." Nathan Brooks's voice was very quiet. "I've been sitting here 40 minutes, and I want to throw this man through my own wall, and he didn't do it. He's a clerk with a good coat and a piece of paper, and he's been somebody's shovel for 4 years, and he doesn't own a gun. That doesn't make him— it makes him useful," Nathan Brooks said. She got the letter. She got both of them. Nathan's 11 years old, soft as cloth, and Thomas Morgan's postmarked the 8th, and she put them on that table in front of a man she wanted dead, and she stood behind Nathan Brooks' chair with her hands in fists. Silas Crow read the first one. It took him about 2 minutes, and at the end of it he put it down very carefully and did not look up. "Mr. Brooks, read the other one." "Sir, I'd like to say—" "Read the other one." Silas Crow read Thomas Morgan's letter. And then Silas Crow, 31 ranches, $400,000 a man, who had sat at 100 tables with his hat in his hands, put his forehead down on Nathan Brooks's kitchen table and wept like a child. Nobody said anything for a long time. "He was coming here," Crow said finally. "Yes." "He wasn't running from me." "No." "He'd already signed," Silas Crow said. His face was ruined. "He'd already signed. He'd have signed it whether I shot him or not. He signed it on the 12th of November, sir, at his own table with his own hand, and he was so pleased about the water." "Mr. Crow, he put on his good coat," Silas Crow said. "He put on his good coat, and he got a Bible off a shelf, and he woke his daughter up at 4 in the morning, and he drove 11 miles up a canyon to say 2 names to a stranger. That's what he was doing. That's what he was doing when somebody put a bullet in him." He wiped his face. "And I've been in a hotel 3 weeks thinking he was running from me," Silas Crow said. "I've been 3 weeks thinking that, and it was the worst thing I'd ever done, and it turns out I wasn't even in it." And then Silas Crow said the sentence that changed everything. "He wasn't shot for the ranch." Nathan Brooks looked up. "What?" "Mr. Brooks, listen to me." Crow was leaning forward now, and his hands were flat on the table. "I had the ranch. I had it on the 12th of November. It was done. There's no reason on God's earth to shoot a man on the 9th of December for a piece of ground you've already got in your pocket." Nobody breathed. "So why'd he get shot?" Silas Crow said. Nathan Brooks did not move. "He was on the Canyon Road," Crow said. "Nobody's on the Canyon Road in December. That road goes one place, and I've been in this territory 11 years, and I know exactly where it goes." "Crow?" "It goes here," Silas Crow said. Clara Morgan's hand went to the back of Nathan's chair. "He wasn't shot for a ranch," Silas Crow said. "He was shot for where he was going." "That's not—" "Mr. Brooks, that man mailed a letter on the 8th, Crow said, "and he got shot on the 9th. The kitchen went absolutely still. "Who reads the mail in this county?" Silas Crow said. "Bonjour." Nathan Brooks stood up so fast his chair went into the wall. "No. Sir. No. Mr. Brooks, you shut your mouth," Nathan Brooks said. "You shut your mouth in my house." "Nathan," Clara Morgan said. "Don't." "Nathan." "Don't, Clara." And Clara Morgan said, "Hollis Tanner brought that letter up here himself." So, Nathan Brooks stood in the middle of his own kitchen and did not say anything. "He brought it himself," Clara said. "Mr. Tanner, 70 years old, rode 11 miles up a canyon in January to hand you a letter, and Nathan, he said the postmaster asked him to." "He did." "Nathan, there's no postmaster in 11 miles. Nathan Brooks put his hand on the wall. "That's not—" "There's no post office," Clara Morgan said. "There's a store. There's a store in the valley with a sack in it, and the sack goes down to Boise City on the Tuesday wagon. And whose store is it, Nathan?" Nathan Brooks did not answer. "Whose store is it?" And Nathan Brooks said, "Hollis Tanner's." Silas Crow said, "How old's the man?" Crow, "How old Mr. Brooks?" 70. "Has he got a good hand?" Nathan Brooks turned around. "Get out of my house." "Has he got a good hand, sir?" "Get out of my house." "Mr. Brooks, has he got a good hand?" Silas Crow said, "Because the man in my hotel room writes beautiful, and he's about 60, and he's got a different coat every time, and he has never in 4 years told me his name. And there's one man in this county who's known your wife's name for 11 years, and he handed you a letter in your own yard 4 days ago." Nathan Brooks came across that kitchen, and Clara Morgan got in front of him. "Nathan, move. Nathan. Clara Jane, move. Look at me." She had both hands on his chest, and she was 110 pounds, and she did not move an inch. "Look at me. Nathan, look at me." He looked at her. "He's 61, Clara Morgan said. Everything stopped. "What? Hollis Tanner's 61. Her voice was shaking. "Not 70. Nathan, he's 61. My father told me. My father's known him 19 years, and they were the same age. Within 3 years, my father was 58. Nathan Brooks said, "He told me he was 70. When?" 11 years ago, Nathan Brooks said. He sat down on his own floor. Clara Morgan went down with him. "Nathan. He told me he was 70 and 71, Nathan Brooks said. "In the churchyard, when we were putting him in the ground. He said," his voice was going, "He said, son, I'm 70 years old, and I've buried a lot of people, and I'm going to tell you something." "What did he say?" And Nathan Brooks said, he said, "Don't you let anybody in this valley thank you for anything, or they'll own you." The kitchen went silent. Clara Morgan put her hand over her mouth. "Nathan. He said it in the churchyard," Nathan Brooks said, "over my wife's grave. He said the minute you take a thank you, they've got a hook in you, and I was 35 years old, and I'd just put my whole family in the ground, and I believed him." "Nathan. 11 years, Nathan Brooks said. "Clara. 11 years. Every porch, every sack of flour, every bottle. Every single time I rode off before somebody could say my name, I was doing what a man told me in a churchyard on the worst day of my life." He put his hands over his head. "He built me," Nathan Brooks said. Silas Crow stood up. "Mr. Brooks, don't. Sir, I've got to say it. Don't. He's known where Thomas Morgan was for 19 years. Silas Crow said, "And he's known where you were for 11, and he sat between the two of you, and he kept you 11 miles apart, and neither one of you ever knew, and sir, he did it for free." "Crow, he never took $1 off either one of you," Silas Crow said. "Same as me. 4 years and he never took $1. That's the shape of the man, Mr. Brooks. That's the whole shape he doesn't take. He gives. He gives you the one thing you can't refuse, and then he owns the rest of your life, and he never has to say another word." Nathan Brooks sat on his own kitchen floor. "What did he give me?" he said. And Silas Crow said, "Permission to be alone." And Clara Morgan said, "Why?" Nobody answered. "Why?" She was standing now. "Mr. Crow, you've been in this 4 years. Why? He's Hollis. Tanner's been in this valley 40 years. He's got a store. He's got a chair by the stove. Everybody loves him. Why would a man do that?" "Ma'am, I don't know." "Why?" "I don't know," Silas Crow said. "Miss Morgan, I don't know one thing about that man, and I never have. I've met a coat 4 times. And Nathan Brooks said from the floor, "The water."
"What's an egg?"
They both turned. "What?" Nathan Brooks stood up. "Crow, what did you ask Thomas Morgan about at his table?" Silas Crow went white. "The water," he said. 31 ranches, Nathan Brooks said. "In 4 years. In this territory. Crow, how many of them have got water?" Silas Crow did not answer. "How many?" "All of them," Silas Crow said. Nobody breathed. "That's not—" Crow's hands had started to shake. "That's not, sir. I picked them. I picked them myself. I picked marginal ground. I picked the ones nobody'd fight over. I picked worthless." "Who told you which ones?" "Nobody told me." "Who told you which ones, Crow?" And Silas Crow said he'd mention things. He sat back down. He sat down like a man whose legs had quit. "He'd mention things," Silas Crow said. "That's all. Once a year. He'd say, you know, old Ferris up the North Fork is having a hard winter, and I'd think, well, that's interesting. And I'd go up and take my hat off." His face was falling apart. And I thought I was choosing. 4 years. I've been 4 years thinking I was a clever man who picked his own ground. Nathan Brooks said, "There's a line." "What?" 31 ranches with water, Nathan Brooks said. "In 4 years. Crow, get a map." "Mr. Brooks, get a map and lay 'em out, and I'll tell you right now what you'll see, because I've ridden every foot of this country for 11 years, and there's exactly one thing in this territory that 31 wet sections in a row adds up to." And Silas Crow said, "A railroad." Yum. The kitchen was silent for 11 seconds. Then Clara Morgan said, "My father's ranch." "Ma'am, my father's ranch has the spring," she said. "Nathan, the Morgan Spring. It's everybody in this valley knows it. It's the only live water above 4,000 feet. My grandfather filed on it in 1864. Nathan Brooks said, 1864. "Yes?" "Clara, that's before the territory." "I know. That's senior to every claim in this county by 20 years, Nathan Brooks said. And Silas Crow stood up so fast, his chair went over. "That's the last one," he said. "Say that again," Nathan said. "Mr. Brooks, that's the last one." Crow had both hands on his head. 31. I've done 31 in 4 years, and I've been at it 4 years, and I've never once thought about the number, sir. I did 9 in 79, and 11 in 80, and 9 in 81, and 2 in 82. So it's January, Silas Crow said. "And I did the Morgan place in November, and I've been sitting in a hotel for 3 weeks with no work." Nobody moved. "He's not mentioning things anymore," Silas Crow said. "Mamtopog," Nathan Brooks said. "It's done. It's done. The line's closed." "The line's closed," Silas Crow said. "And I'm the only man in this territory whose name is on all 31 of them, and there's a false death certificate sitting on my file in Mr. Brooks." He stopped. He put his hand over his mouth. "Say it," Clara Morgan said. And Silas Crow said, "I'm the last one too." Nathan Brooks walked to the window. He stood there a long time. "Nathan," Clara said. "He knew your daddy was coming here," Nathan Brooks said. "What?" "He read the letter." Nathan didn't turn around. "It went in his sack on the 8th. He read it. And it said, 'I am coming Tuesday. I will bring your Bible. I have not read past the first line.'" Clara Morgan sat down. "And he'd spent 2 years keeping you apart," Silas Crow said quietly. "He'd spent 19 years keeping us apart," Nathan Brooks said. 9 of them he didn't know. 2 of them he did. And then a letter went in his sack that said the whole thing was over on Tuesday. Nathan. "So he shot him on the 9th, Nathan Brooks said. "That's not enough," Clara said. They turned. "That's not enough, Nathan." She was standing. "That's not a man doesn't kill somebody over a thank you. 19 years of keeping 2 men apart because he doesn't want them to say a name to each other. That's not a reason. That's not a reason, that's—" She stopped. "Clara?" Nathan said. "Nathan," Clara Morgan said slowly. "Why'd he keep you alone?" "Because he—" "No." She was shaking her head. "No. Listen to me. Listen. He told you in a churchyard, 'Don't let anybody thank you, or they'll own you.' 11 years ago. 19 years ago, he starts telling my father he can't find you. 4 years ago, he starts mentioning things to Mr. Crow." Nathan Brooks had gone very still. "He's been building this for 19 years, Clara Morgan said. "Nathan, what's your ranch got?" Nathan Brooks did not move. "Nathan!" "Clara, what's your ranch got?" And Nathan Brooks said, "The canyon." Silas Crow stood up. "Say that again." "The canyon road runs through my ground," Nathan Brooks said. 4 miles of it. My father filed it in 1860. Silas Crow put both hands on that table. "Mr. Brooks," he said, "is there any other way up this mountain?" Nathan Brooks turned around. "No," he said. Nobody spoke. 31 sections of water, Silas Crow said, and a spring at 4,000 feet, and there's one road to all of it, and it runs 4 miles through the ground of a man who hasn't spoken to another human being in 11 years. Clara Morgan said, "Oh God." "He didn't build you to be alone," Silas Crow said. "He built you to be unwitnessed." Nathan Brooks put his hand on the wall. 11 years, he said. 11 years, sir. 11 years of a man who won't take a thank you, won't sit at a table, won't come to town, won't sign anything, won't— "Mr. Brooks, do you know what you are?" Silas Crow's voice was shaking. "You're the only landowner in this territory with no friends. You're the only man on that line who'd never come down off this mountain and say, 'Hold on now, that's not right.' Crow, you're not the last piece," Silas Crow said. "You're the foundation. He started with you in 1871, sir, in a churchyard over your wife's grave, before there was one deed, before there was me. That man stood over the two people you loved most on this earth, and he told you the one sentence that would keep you quiet for 11 years. Nathan Brooks slid down the wall. "Why me?" he said. And Silas Crow said, "Because you were the only one who wouldn't be missed." "Bien." Clara Morgan crossed that kitchen and got down on the floor in front of him. "Nathan." He couldn't look at her. "Nathan, look at me. Clara, look at me." He looked at her. "He was wrong," Clara Morgan said. "Ma'am." "He was wrong, Nathan." She had both hands on his face. 19 years. He was wrong for 19 years, and he never knew it, and I want you to hear why. "Clara, my father spent 19 years looking for you," she said, and her voice broke wide open. 19 years, every spring. He came down off that mountain and he asked a man in a store if he'd found you yet, and the man said no, and my father said all right next year, and he did that 19 times. Nathan Brooks made a sound. "You'd have been missed," Clara Morgan said. "You've been missed for 11 years by a man who didn't know your name. He was missing you the whole time. He was missing you in a store in front of the man who was doing it." Silas Crow turned around and looked out the window. Because he couldn't watch it. He said that later in a courtroom under oath, and nobody in that room understood what he meant. I turned around because I couldn't watch it. "Clara," Nathan Brooks said, "I'm here." "I have to open the room." She went very still. "Nathan, there's a Bible out there somewhere." Nathan Brooks said, "With my wife's name in it in a man's hands, and he's been reading it for a month like a newspaper, and I've got a room in this house. I've had locked for 11 years, and ma'am," his voice went, "I can't go get her back out of that man's hands if I won't even go in and get her out of my own." Clara Morgan said, "I know about the room." Nathan Brooks looked up. "What?" "I've known since the 3rd day." "Clara, I found it looking for a blanket." She was crying. "3rd day, and I saw the lock, and it's on the inside. Nathan, the padlock's on the inside of the door, and I stood in that hall with a lamp, and I understood exactly what that was." "You never said—" 29 days, Clara Morgan said. Nathan Brooks put his face in his hands. "Why? Because it was yours," she said. He got up. He got the key out of a coffee tin on a shelf where it had been for 11 years, and he went down that hall, and he stood in front of that door, and he couldn't do it. Clara Morgan stood behind him and did not touch him and did not say one word. 11 seconds. 20. "Ma'am, I'm here. It's just a room." "Yes, it's a room with a bed in it and a—" His voice was in pieces. "There's toys in there, Clara. I made 'em. I made 'em in the winter of 70, and he got 4 of 'em. There's 9, and he got 4. "Nathan, I can't." And Clara Morgan said, "Then say their names first." Nathan Brooks put his forehead against that door. "Sarah," he said. "Again." "Sarah." "Again, Nathan." "Sarah," Nathan Brooks said. "Sam." And Clara Morgan said them back. "Sarah," she said. "Sam." And that was it. That was the entire thing. 19 years of a man riding down a mountain to say 2 words, and it happened in a hallway, in a house 11 miles from anywhere out of the mouth of his daughter, and Nathan Brooks opened that door. And what he found in it was not what anybody expected, and it took the top off the whole thing. It wasn't the toys. The toys were there. 9 of them on a shelf, and 4 of them worn down to nothing, and 5 of them still sharp at the edges because a boy died before he ever got to hold them. Clara Morgan saw that in about 4 seconds and had to put her hand on the doorframe. It wasn't the blanket folded on the foot of a bed that had been made 11 years ago by a woman who was dead by supper. It was the letters. There were 9 of them in a box on the table by the window, and Nathan Brooks looked at them and said, "Those aren't mine." Clara Morgan said, "Nathan, those aren't mine." "What? I've never seen those in my life." He hadn't moved past the doorway. "Clara, I locked this room in April of '71, and I have not opened it since, and there is a box on that table that was not there when I shut the door." Nobody breathed. Silas Crow said from the hall, "Mr. Brooks, 9 letters," Nathan Brooks said. He crossed that room and picked one up and looked at the front of it, and he went the color of paper. "That's Tom Morgan's hand," he said. Oh, Clara Morgan's knees went. Silas Crow caught her elbow and she didn't notice. "That's not—" She couldn't get air. "Nathan, that's not possible. That's your daddy's hand. Nathan, nobody's been in this room. That's your daddy's hand, Clara Jane," Nathan Brooks said. "And there's 9 of them, and they're addressed to me, and I have had a padlock on the inside of this door for 11 years. He turned one over. There was no postmark. There was no stamp. There was nothing on any of them at all, except Nathan Brooks in a dead man's handwriting 9 times in 9 different inks over what looked like 9 different years. And Silas Crow said, "Somebody's been in this house." Nathan Brooks sat down on his own son's bed. "Nathan, 19 years, he said. Nathan talked to me. He wrote me." Nathan Brooks's hands were shaking so hard he dropped one. "Clara, your daddy wrote me 9 times. He wrote me 9 times, and Hollis Tanner took every one of them out of that sack and rode 11 miles up this canyon and put 'em in the one room in the world he knew I'd never open." Clara Morgan slid down the wall. "That's—" She had both hands over her mouth. "That's not why Nathan. Why not burn them? He had them in his hands. Why would he—" And Silas Crow said, "Because he can't." They both turned. Silas Crow was standing in that doorway with his hat in his hands and his face had gone gray. "Mr. Crow." "He can't throw anything away, ma'am." Crow's voice was very quiet. "That's the sickness. I've been 4 years in a room with that man's coat, and I never once saw the man, but I'll tell you what I know about him. He keeps things. Every time he's come to me, he's had a book. 4 times. Different coat, different hat, same book. So he never wrote in it," Silas Crow said. 4 years, ma'am. He carried a book to 4 meetings, and he never once opened it, and I never thought about it till this minute." Nathan Brooks said, "What was in it?" And Silas Crow said, "I think it was a Bible." Yeg. Nobody moved. "He's had it a month," Clara said. "That's what Nathan, that's what he took it in December." "No, ma'am." "Mr. Crow, I saw that book in '79, Silas Crow said. The room went silent. "I saw it in '79, and I saw it in '80, and I saw it in '81, Silas Crow said. "And it was black, and it was worn down to the boards on the corners, and he carried it under his arm like a man walking to church." Clara Morgan stood up. "That's not my father's Bible," she said. "My father's Bible was on the shelf. It was on the shelf my whole life. I dusted it, mister. I dusted it every week for—" She stopped. Everything in her stopped. "Clara," Nathan said. And Clara Morgan said, "It never moved." She sat back down. "Ma'am, it never moved," she said. "Nathan, in 22 years, it sat on that shelf and it never moved, and my father never opened it, and I dusted around it every week of my life, and I never once—" She put her hand over her mouth. I never once picked it up, she said. Nathan Brooks stood up off that bed. Clara, I never picked it up. Clara, listen to me. Nathan? I don't know if that Bible had anything in it at all, Clara Morgan said. I've never opened it. My father never opened it. It's been on a shelf for 11 years, and I have never in my life had it in my 2 hands, and I don't know what's in it, and I never did. Silas Crow said, Then what did he take? Nobody answered. Ma'am, Crow said, Miss Morgan, your father put a Bible in a box under the wagon seat at 4 in the morning. And a man walked up on that wagon in the snow and took it and left a dish towel. He was thinking out loud now, and his voice was climbing. And Mr. Brooks, that same man, has been carrying a black book to my hotel rooms since 1879. Nathan Brooks went absolutely still. That's 4 years before December, Silas Crow said. Crow said. Crow. He already had one, Silas Crow said. Sir, he already had a black book he carried like a churchgoer and never opened 4 years before anybody shot anybody, and then in December he walks up on a dying man in the snow and takes another one. Clara Morgan said, There's 2. There's 2, Silas Crow agreed. 2 Bibles. 2 books, ma'am. Nathan Brooks said, No. They turned. No, Nathan Brooks said again. No, Crow. There's 1 Bible. There's 1, and I gave it to Tom Morgan in a road in 71, and it's been on his shelf ever since, and Clara dusted around it for 22 years. Then what's the other one? It's not a Bible, Nathan Brooks said. The room went quiet. It's a ledger, Nathan Brooks said. Silas Crow sat down on the floor of that room. He sat down right there in the doorway like his legs had quit, and he was 44 years old, and he had 31 ranches and $400,000 of Idaho behind him, and he sat down on the floor. Oh God, he said. Crow. He read it at me, Silas Crow said. Mr. Brooks, 4 years. He'd sit in my hotel room with that book under his arm and he'd say, You know, old Ferris up the North Fork is having a hard winter, and I thought he was chatting. He was reading. He was reading, Silas Crow said. And I've been 4 years thinking I chose my own ground, and there's a man been holding the list in his lap the whole time. Nathan Brooks said, How many names? Sir, how many names are in it? Crow 31. And Silas Crow said, There's 41. Clara Morgan said, What? That's what he said to me, once, in 81. Silas Crow had both hands on his head. He said, Mr. Crow, you're about 3/4 done, and I laughed, and I said, Done with what? And he said, He stopped. Say it, Nathan said. He said your life's work. Nobody spoke for 11 seconds. 31 of 41, Nathan Brooks said. 3/4. Silas Crow agreed. Sir, that's 31 of 41 is 3/4. That's not a figure of speech. That was a report. Then there's 10 left. There's 10 left. Nathan Brooks turned around and looked out the window at 2 graves in the snow. There's 10 families on this mountain, he said, sitting in their houses right now, and there's a man in a store 11 miles down that road with their names in a book, and he's been coming to my house. Clara Morgan stood up. Nathan. I know. Nathan, he's been in this room. I know. He's been in this room, and he's been in this house, and he's... Nathan, how many times? Her voice was rising. 9 letters, 9 years. He's been walking into your house for 9 years and putting my father's mail in a room with your dead son's toys in it. I know. He ate in that kitchen. I know, Clara. When? She said. Nathan, when does he come? You're here. You're always here. You never leave. You never go anywhere. When in God's name does that man... She stopped, and Nathan Brooks said, When I'm out delivering flour. The room went silent. Oh, Clara Morgan said. That's it, Nathan Brooks said. Ma'am, that's the whole thing. I go out at 11 at night, 4 nights a week, 11 years, and I'm gone 4 hours, and everybody in this valley knows it, and there's exactly one man who knows which 4 hours, because he's the one tells me who's out of flour." Clara Morgan put her hand on the wall. "He built you a schedule," Silas Crow said. "9 letters," Nathan Brooks said. 9 years, and every one of them came through that store. He picked one up. "Clara, don't. Clara, I've got to. Don't." She was crying. "Nathan, don't read it. Not standing up, not in this room with the toys, not—" And Nathan Brooks said, "I've been not reading things for 11 years. He opened it. It was dated the 14th of April, 1873. "Mr. Brooks, I do not know your name. I am writing to a man I met in a road, and I am giving this to Hollis Tanner because he says he will find you. I have not read past the first line of your letter, and I never will. But, sir, I have got a girl, and she is 13, and she is going to live because of what you did, and I want you to know that. That is all this is. I am not asking for anything. T. Morgan." Nathan Brooks read it twice. Then he read the second one. "April 1874. Mr. Brooks, 1 year. She is 14. She read a whole book this winter. I am told you are still out there. T.M. the 3rd. April 1875. She is 15 and she has got a temper on her, and I am glad of it. T.M. Nathan Brooks sat down on the floor. Nathan. He couldn't speak. "Nathan what?" And Nathan Brooks said, "They're about you." Clara Morgan stopped breathing. "They're all about you," he said. "Clara. 9 letters, 9 years. Every April. He wrote a stranger every April for 9 years to tell him how you were doing." She went down on the floor next to him. "Read it," she said. "Ma'am, read one." And Nathan Brooks read the 6th one out loud, dated April of 1878, in a dead child's room to a dead man's daughter. "Mr. Brooks, she is 18. She wants to go to Boise City, and I have told her no, and she has not spoken to me in 9 days. I do not know if I am doing this right. I have nobody to ask. My wife has been gone 11 years, and I have got nobody to ask, and I am writing to a man in a road because there is nobody else. Sir, am I doing this right, T.M.? Clara Morgan made a sound like she'd been hit. "That's what he wrote." Nathan Brooks said, "That's what he wrote to a stranger in 1878, and it went in a sack in a store 11 miles from my house." She took the last one. April of 1881, 8 months before he died. "Mr. Brooks, she is 21. Hollis says he has still not found you. 9 years. I have decided he is not looking very hard, and I have decided I do not care, because I have worked out that the letters are not for you. I think I have known that a while. I am 57 years old, and I have been writing to a man in a road for 9 years, because I have got nobody, and if you ever get these, I want you to know they were the best part of every year of my life. I hope you are not dead. I hope you are somewhere with somebody. Sarah and Sam." There. I say them every April. T.M. Clara Morgan put that letter against her chest. "He knew," she said. "Ma'am, he knew Nathan." She was sobbing. "He knew Hollis wasn't looking. He knew in 81, and he wrote it down and he kept mailing them anyway. He didn't know why." Nathan Brooks said. "What?" And Nathan Brooks said, "He thought Hollis was being lazy. Clara, he never once thought a man was doing it on purpose. He wrote that in a letter and put it in the sack, ma'am. He wrote, 'I have decided he is not looking very hard,' and he handed it to the man he was writing about, and he never thought a thing about it." Silas Crow said, "Mr. Brooks." "Not now." "Sir." "Not now, Crow." "Mr. Brooks, when did he stop?" Nathan Brooks looked up. "What?" "There's 9 letters," Silas Crow said. 73 to 81. 9 Aprils in a row. So it's 1882, Silas Crow said. "And he died in December. And there's no letter for April of 82, and he'd have written one, sir. He'd have written one in about 10 weeks, and he died first." Nathan Brooks stood up. That's not... He wrote 9 Aprils in a row, Crow said. And in November I sat at his table and asked him about the water, and in December he put on his good coat and drove up this canyon. Crow. He was going to say it in person, sir, Silas Crow said. That's what changed. 9 years of writing, and then all of a sudden a man puts on his coat, and I've been sitting here trying to figure out what happened between April and December of 1882, and Mr. Brooks, he stopped. It was me, Silas Crow said. Yeah, Clara Morgan said. What? I sat at his table, Silas Crow said, in November, and I asked him to sign the back of his own deed, and he did. So ma'am, when'd he figure it out? Nobody breathed. He was 58 years old, and he'd been on that ground 19 years, Silas Crow said. He wasn't a fool, Miss Morgan. He was a man who read the back of a deed after he signed it. Clara Morgan went white. He knew, she said. He knew by December, Silas Crow said, and he'd lost the whole thing, and he had a girl at home, and Miss Morgan, where'd he go? Ushin, the room was silent. He went to Nathan, Clara Morgan said. He went to Nathan, Silas Crow said. Ma'am, he lost his ranch in November the same way he lost his crop in 71, and he did the exact same thing both times. He sat in a road for 4 hours, and then he went and found the one man who'd been kind to him. Nathan Brooks put both hands on the windowsill. He was coming to tell me, he said. Sir, he was coming to tell me he'd lost it. His voice was gone. That's not Clara. Clara, that's not a thank you. He wasn't coming up here to say 2 names. He was coming up here because he'd lost everything, and he was 58 years old, and he had a girl at home, and he couldn't figure out how to tell her. Clara Morgan put her face in her hands. Same as 71, she said. Same as 71, Nathan Brooks said. And the letter? Silas Crow said quietly. They turned. The letter he mailed on the 8th, Crow said. It doesn't say any of that, does it, sir? Read it again. It doesn't say one word about the ranch. Nathan Brooks took it out of his shirt. He read it. And then he said, no, it doesn't. It says he's coming Tuesday. It says he's bringing his daughter. It says, I want you to meet her. Silas Crow's voice had gone very careful. Sir, that man had lost everything he owned 3 weeks before he wrote that, and he wrote you a letter about a thank you, and he never mentioned it. Clara Morgan stood up. He was going to ask, she said. Ma'am, he was going to ask, Clara Morgan said, and her whole face came apart. That's why he brought me. That's why he wouldn't tell me where we were going. He was going to walk up to a stranger's door and say 2 names, and then he was going to ask him to take me. She couldn't finish. Nathan Brooks turned around. Clara. He was going to ask you to take me, Clara Morgan said, and he couldn't put it in the letter. Boy. Nobody spoke for a long moment, and then Nathan Brooks said, He did ask me. Clara Morgan looked up. In the snow, Nathan Brooks said. Ma'am, he asked me in the snow, 2 words, with a hole in his chest at 20 below and his hand on my coat, and I said I can't, and he said it again, and I said I've got nothing, and he said it again. His voice went. He asked me 3 times, Nathan Brooks said. He got out about 11 words in his whole life at the end of it, and he used 3 of them on the same 2 words. Nathan? And I said no. Nathan Brooks said. Clara Morgan crossed that room. You didn't say no. Ma'am, you did not say no. She had both hands on him. Nathan Brooks, look at me. You said I can't, and then you put me on your horse. I said, you said I can't, and then you did it anyway. She was crying and she was furious. That's the whole man. That's you. That's what you've been doing for 11 years. That's the flower. That's the quinine. That's Del Rainey's stump. You say I've got nothing, and then you go out the back door and do it anyway, and ride off before anybody can see. Nathan Brooks couldn't speak. He knew that, Clara Morgan said. He knew that about you 11 years ago in a road, mister. That's why he drove past 4 houses. Silas Crow stood up. Mr. Brooks. Crow? Sir, I've got to say something and it's going to be ugly. Nathan Brooks turned around. Say it. He's coming here, Silas Crow said. Nobody moved. When? Clara said. Tonight, Silas Crow said. Or tomorrow. Ma'am, I rode up this canyon at noon in front of God and everybody, and I stopped at that store for directions. Clara Morgan said, You what? I stopped at that store, Silas Crow said, and there was an old man at the stove, and I said, How do I find the Brooks place? And he said, He stopped. His hands had started to shake. He said, Son, you don't find it. He's got no reason to open the door. And then he told me exactly how to get here, Silas Crow said. Nathan Brooks sat down on his son's bed. He sent you. Sir. He sent you, Nathan Brooks said. He sat in that store and he told a man with 31 deeds and a false certificate on his file how to find the one house in this territory where nobody'd hear a gunshot. Clara Morgan said, Nathan? That's 3 of us, Nathan Brooks said. Silas Crow went white. 3 of us in a canyon, 11 miles from anywhere, Nathan Brooks said. The clerk whose name is on all 31. The girl who's already dead on paper. And the man with 4 miles of road. He looked up. Crow. Who'd miss us? Silas Crow said. Nobody. Say it again. Nobody. Silas Crow said. And Mr. Brooks, that's not, sir. That's not an accident. That's not. He's been building that for 19 years. He's been... And Clara Morgan said, He's wrong. They both turned. She was standing in the middle of that room with a dead child's blanket in her hands, and she'd stopped crying, and her face was something neither one of them had ever seen. He's wrong, Clara Morgan said. Ma'am, he's been wrong for 11 years and nobody's ever told him. She turned on Nathan. Nathan, how many houses? Hey. What? How many houses have you left flour on? Nathan Brooks said, Clara. How many? I don't. Yes, you do. She was in his face now. You know exactly. You've been doing it 4 nights a week for 11 years, and you know every porch on this mountain, and I want the number. And Nathan Brooks said, 41. The room went absolutely silent. Silas Crow said, Oh my God. Say that again, Clara Morgan whispered. 41 families, Nathan Brooks said. That's Clara. That's every house above the valley. That's the whole mountain. That's what's up here. And Silas Crow said, That's the ledger. Nobody breathed. 41, Crow said. He had both hands on his head. 41. He said I was 3/4 done. 31 of 41. Mr. Brooks. They're the same list, Nathan Brooks said. They're the same list, Silas Crow said. Clara Morgan sat down. He's been telling you who to buy, she said. Out of the same book he's been telling Nathan who's out of flour. Nathan Brooks stood up. 19 years, he said. Nathan. 19 years he's had one list, Nathan Brooks said. One. And he's been reading it to 2 men. He reads Crow the ones that are weak, and he reads me the ones that are hungry, and it's the same name Clara. It's the same name on the same day. Silas Crow said, The Ferris place. Nathan Brooks turned. What? 81, Silas Crow said. He told me old Ferris was having a hard winter, and I went up in March and took my hat off. And Nathan Brooks said, I left shoes on that porch in February. Clara Morgan put both hands over her mouth. He sent you first, she said. Ma'am? Nathan. He sent you first. She was standing up. He sends you up there in February with shoes and flour and firewood so they make it through the winter, and then he sends Crow up in March with a pen. Nathan Brooks said no. Nathan. No. He kept them alive so they could sign, Clara Morgan said. Nathan Brooks put his hand on the wall and did not fall down. 11 years, he said. Nathan. 11 years of riding out at midnight. His voice had nothing in it. Every sack, every bottle, every stick of firewood. Clara, I thought I was. He couldn't finish. I've been keeping them alive for him, Nathan Brooks said. Silas Crow said, Sir, don't. Mr. Brooks, listen to me. Don't crow. Sir, that's not what happened, Silas Crow said. Nathan Brooks turned around. I just kept 41 families breathing so a man with a good coat could take their ground, he said. And you're going to tell me that's not what happened? Yes, sir, Silas Crow said. I am. Then say it. And Silas Crow said, There's 31 Mr. Brooks, not 41. Nobody moved. There's 31, Silas Crow said again. 4 years. I did 31, and I've been 3/4 done since November, and I've been sitting in a hotel with no work, and sir, I want you to ask me the question. Nathan Brooks said, What question? Ask me why I only got 31. Nathan Brooks stood there. Why'd you only get 31? And Silas Crow said, Because 10 of them said no. Clara Morgan sat down on the floor. 10 of them said no, Silas Crow said. 4 years. 10 times I've gone up a mountain and taken my hat off and asked a man to sign the back of his own deed, and he's looked at me and said no. His voice was shaking, and I never once thought about it. Not once. I'd ride down, and I'd think, well, that's a stubborn old man, and I'd cross him off. Crow, Mr. Brooks? I've been 11 years at this, Silas Crow said. 11 years. 31 ranches in this territory, and 9 more before that in Oregon, and I have never once, sir. In 11 years, I have had exactly 10 men say no to me, and every single one of them was on this mountain. Nathan Brooks could not speak. Every single one, Silas Crow said. Clara Morgan said, Why? Ma'am. Why? She was on her feet. Mr. Crow, why'd they say no? What did they say? 10 men. What did they say to you? And Silas Crow said, They all said the same thing. The room went silent. Everyone, Crow said. 4 years. 10 men. I'd sit at the table and I'd take my hat off and I'd say, Sir, would you sign the back, so I know it's the true copy, and they'd look at me for about 4 seconds and they'd say... He stopped. His face was coming apart. They'd say, I'll ask Brooks. Nathan Brooks made a sound. He went down. Not to his knees, he sat down on the floor of that room like a man who'd been cut, and Clara Morgan was on him in a second with both arms around his head. They'd say, I'll ask Brooks, Silas Crow said, and he was crying now, openly standing in a doorway in a stranger's house. And I'd say, Who's Brooks? And they'd say, The fella up the canyon. And I'd say, Well, is he a lawyer? And they'd say, No. Crow. And I'd say, Is he kin? Silas Crow said. And they'd say, No. And I'd say, Well then, who in the hell is he? Nathan Brooks had his face in his wife's blanket. And they'd say, Silas Crow said, He's the one leaves the flower. Nobody spoke for a long time. 10 men, Silas Crow said finally. 10 men on this mountain who'd never met you, who'd never spoken to you, who couldn't have picked you out of a crowd of 4, and every one of them looked a landman in the eye and said, I'll ask Brooks first. Clara Morgan said, Did they? Silas Crow stopped. Ma'am. Did they ask him? And Silas Crow said no. Gang, they couldn't, he said. That's the thing. That's the thing I've been sitting on this floor with for 10 minutes. They said I'll ask Brooks, and then they went out to their yards, and they thought about riding up this canyon and knocking on a door, and they couldn't do it because everybody in this valley knows Nathan Brooks won't open the door. Nathan Brooks lifted his head. So they just said no. Silas Crow said, to me. That's all they had. They couldn't get to you, so they used you as a reason, and they said no to a man with a pen, and they kept their ground. He wiped his face. 11 years, Mr. Brooks, Silas Crow said. You've been 11 years thinking you keep people alive so somebody else can take it. Sir, you're the reason 10 families on this mountain still own their ground, and you have never spoken to one of them. Clara Morgan said, Nathan. He couldn't answer. Nathan, listen to me. She had his face in both hands. Hollis Tanner told you in a churchyard that if anybody thanked you, they'd own you. 11 years, and you believed him, and you rode off before anybody could say your name. Clara, and it didn't work, Clara Morgan said. He looked at her. It didn't work, Nathan. She was laughing and crying at the same time. That's the whole thing. That's the whole 19 years. He built you a man nobody could thank, and it didn't work because they thanked you anyway, in their kitchens, to a stranger with a pen. They said your name to Silas Crow when you weren't even in the room. Nathan Brooks stood up. He stood up and he wiped his face with the back of his wrist, and he looked at Silas Crow. Crow. Sir. You said there's 10 left. Yes, sir. And he stopped mentioning things. Yes, sir. Because he's out of names, Nathan Brooks said. Because 31 signed and 10 wouldn't, and he's had 4 years and he's got nothing left, and the only thing standing between that man and 10 families is a door that won't open. Silas Crow said, Yes, sir. And Nathan Brooks said, Then I'm going to open it. Clara Morgan said, Nathan, get your coat. Nathan, it's 11 miles. Get your coat, Clara Jane. It's dark. And Nathan Brooks said, Ma'am, there's 10 houses on this mountain with a lamp in the window, and I know every one of them because I've been standing behind their trees for 11 years. He picked up the 9 letters. He put them in his shirt. And tonight, Nathan Brooks said, I'm going to knock and I'm going to stand there. He knocked on Del Rainey's door at 9 o'clock that night, and he did not run. That was the hardest thing Nathan Brooks ever did in his life, and he'd buried a wife and a boy 5 days apart with his own hands. He stood on that porch with his hat off and his heart going like a hammer, and he made himself count to 11, and at 4 the door came open and Del Rainey stood there in his stocking feet with a lamp. He looked at Nathan Brooks. He looked past him at the horses, and he did not say one word, and Nathan Brooks understood in about a second and a half that the man could not. Del. Nothing. Del, it's... I know who it is, Del Rainey said. Can I come in? And Del Rainey said, You've never asked me anything in your life. No, sir. 11 years. His voice was doing something. 11 years, Nathan. You put a bottle on my stump. You wouldn't look at me. My wife was 4 days from dead, and you shut a door in my face, and then you saved her life out the back and rode off, and I've been... He stopped. He put his hand over his mouth. Ruth, he shouted. Ruth, and a woman who should have been dead in December came around that corner and saw Nathan Brooks standing in her door with his hat in his hands, and Ruth Rainey put both hands over her face and started to cry. He told them at that table. It took him 40 minutes. He told them all of it, the road, in 71, the Bible, the letter, the churchyard, the store, the 9 Aprils, the list. Silas Crow sat at that table too, and said his own name out loud, and told them what he'd done, and Del Rainey did not throw him out, which nobody expected. And at the end of it, Del Rainey said, Say the part about Hollis again. Del, say the part about Hollis Nathan. He told me in the churchyard, Nathan Brooks said, over Sarah's grave. He said, Don't let anybody thank you, or they'll own you. Del Rainey sat there. Then he stood up and walked out of his own kitchen. They heard him in the next room. They heard a grown man make a sound in the next room. And when he came back, his face was ruined, and he had a piece of paper in his hand, and he put it on the table and said, He told me the same thing. Todd. Nathan Brooks stood up. What? 1874? Del Rainey couldn't look at anybody. My brother died, Ollie. He was 26, and a horse went over on him, and I sat in this kitchen for 2 months. And Hollis Tanner came out here, and he sat in that chair, and he said, Del, I'm going to tell you something. Clara Morgan said, what did he say? And Del Rainey said, he said, don't you go asking people for help, or they'll own you. Nobody breathed. He's been doing it to everybody, Clara Morgan whispered. Ma'am, he's been doing it to everybody on this mountain. She was standing. Mr. Rainey, that's not a coincidence, that's not Nathan. He told you not to take a thank you, and he told him not to ask for help. And that's the same wall. That's the exact same wall. That's 41 families who can't reach each other. 41, Silas Crow said. Everyone turned. Silas Crow had gone gray. 41 families, he said, and nobody talks to anybody, and there's one man in the middle with a store and a stove and a chair. Miss Morgan, how does anybody in this valley find anything out? Nathan Brooks said, they go to the store. They go to the store, Silas Crow said. Del Rainey said, that's 19 years. Del, that's 19 years, Nathan. He sat down hard. I've been in that store every week of my life. He's Hollis buried my mother. He buried my mother. He dug the hole himself. He was 61 years old. Clara Morgan said, 61. The kitchen went silent. Ma'am. How old is Hollis Tanner? Clara Morgan said. Del Rainey said, 61. When? Ma'am. When was he 61, Mr. Rainey? Del Rainey opened his mouth, closed it. He's been 61 as long as I've known him, he said slowly. Ruth Rainey said from the stove. He told me he was 70. Everybody turned. She was 54 years old, and she'd been 4 days from dying in December, and she had a coffee pot in both hands, and she'd gone the color of paper. Ruth. He told me he was 70 in 1868. Ruth Rainey said. Nobody moved. That's 14 years ago, she said. He told me he was 70 in 68, and he told Del he's 61, and he told you he was 70 in 71, and Mr. Brooks. Her hands were shaking so bad she set the pot down. That man tells everybody in this valley a different number, Ruth Rainey said. Silas Crow stood up. Ma'am? Mr. Crow. Ma'am, how long's he had that store? Ruth Rainey said 40 years. Who'd he buy it from? And Ruth Rainey said, nobody. What? The kitchen was absolutely silent. Ma'am? He built it, Ruth Rainey said. That's what he says. He says he came out in 42, and there was nothing here, and he built it. And Mr. Crow, I have heard that man say that 400 times in my life, and I have never once. She stopped. She put her hand on the table. 1842, she said. Nobody spoke. That's 40 years, Ruth Rainey said. And he's 61. So he built a store in this valley when he was 19 years old, and there was not one white man in 100 miles of here. And I have been buying flour off that man my whole life, and I have never once done that arithmetic. Clara Morgan said, nobody has. Ma'am, nobody has. She was walking now. That's the whole thing. That's the entire thing, and I've had it for about 4 seconds, and I want somebody to tell me I'm wrong. Mr. Rainey, has anybody in this valley ever once checked a single thing that man has said? Del Rainey sat there. No, he said. Why? And Del Rainey said, because he's the one you'd check with. Kid. Nathan Brooks put his hat on. Nathan, 9 more houses, he said. Nathan, it's 10 o'clock at night. 9 more houses, Clara Jane. Nathan. And Del Rainey said 4. Nathan Brooks stopped. What? You take 4 and I'll take 5, Del Rainey said. He was already getting his coat. "Nathan, I've been on this mountain 51 years, and I know every one of them houses, and I've been in every one of them kitchens, and son, you've been standing behind their trees." "Del, you've been standing behind their trees," Del Rainey said, "and I've been sitting at their tables, and that's the difference between us, and it's the only thing I've got, and I'd like to give it to you." They knocked on 10 doors that night. Nathan Brooks knocked on 4, and Del Rainey knocked on 5, and Clara Morgan knocked on 1. And by 2 o'clock in the morning, there were 9 wagons and 40 people in Nathan Brooks's yard, and not one of them had been asked to come. That was the part that broke him. Nobody asked them. He came up that canyon at 1:30 with Clara Morgan on the second horse, and there were lamps in his yard, and he stopped 400 yards out and could not make himself go any closer. "Nathan, I can't. Nathan, Clara, I can't." He was shaking. "There's 40 people in my yard." And Clara Morgan said, "I know. Get down." He got down. He walked into his own yard at 1:30 in the morning, and 40 people turned around and looked at him, and nobody said anything at all, and Nathan Brooks stood there with his hat in his hands. And then Ollie Ferris, 78 years old, the man who'd said no to Silas Crow in March of '81, came out of that crowd and said, "You left shoes on my porch." Nathan Brooks couldn't speak. "February," Ollie Ferris said. "My granddaughters, size 4. Left 'em on the step and rode off, and I stood in that door and hollered at your back, and you didn't stop." "Sir." Nathan Brooks. Ollie Ferris said, "I have been waiting 11 years to say thank you to you, and I am 78 years old, and I would like to do it now in front of everybody, and I would like you to stand there and take it." Nathan Brooks stood there and took it. It took 4 minutes. Ollie Ferris said it, and then the widow Pell said it, and then a man named Anders, whose boy had had the croup in '79, said it, and then it was Del Rainey, and then it was Ruth, and Nathan Brooks stood in the middle of his own yard at 2 in the morning, and let 40 people thank him, and he did not run, and he did not look away, and Clara Morgan stood 4 feet behind him, and did not touch him, and did not say one word. And when it was over, Nathan Brooks said, "Nobody owns me." Nobody understood him. 11 years, Nathan Brooks said. "A man told me if I let you thank me, you'd own me. And I believed him. And I have been 11 years riding away from you people in the dark." He put his hat on. "Nobody owns me," he said. He lied. They found the ledger on the 3rd of February. It took 11 men and a territorial marshal out of Boise City, and a warrant that Silas Crow swore out himself standing in front of a judge with his hat in his hands, saying his own name into the record, and 31 ranches after it, the single stupidest legal act anybody in Idaho Territory had ever seen, and the only reason any of it ever happened. "Mr. Crow," the judge said, "do you understand you are confessing?" "Yes, sir." "You're going to prison?" "Yes, sir." "Then why in God's name?" And Silas Crow said, "Because there's 10 families up there, Your Honor, and there's a man in a store with their names in a book, and I'm the only person alive who can tell you what the book is." So, it was under the floor of the store, not hidden. That was the thing that made the marshal sit down on a nail keg and put his head in his hands. It wasn't hidden. It was in a box under a loose board 4 feet from the stove where Hollis Tanner had been sitting for 40 years, and there was no lock on it, and there never had been. 41 names, 31 crossed out, and in the back, in a hand so beautiful it looked printed, a list of the 10 who'd said no, and beside every single one of them in the same ink, the same 4 words, asked Brooks. Did not go. Ugh. Nathan Brooks read that page 11 times. He knew, he said. Son, he knew Marshall. His hands were shaking. Every one. Every single time one of them said my name to Crow, he wrote it down. 19 years. He knew exactly what I was worth, and he knew exactly what I wouldn't do, and he wrote it in a book. Nathan, asked Brooks. Did not go. Nathan Brooks put the book down. 10 times, 10 families. 10 men said my name out loud in a kitchen and then couldn't make it up my road, and he sat in this chair and wrote it down like a man doing sums. Clara Morgan said, Nathan. He was keeping score, Nathan Brooks said. And that was when Clara Morgan found the second book. It was under the first one. It was smaller. It was worn down to the boards at the corners, and it had been carried under a man's arm to 4 hotel rooms in 4 years, and Silas Crow took one look at it from 11 feet away and said, That's it. That's the one. That's what he brought. Clara Morgan opened it, and she said, It's a Bible. Nobody moved. Ma'am. It's a Bible, Mr. Crow. It can't be. It's a Bible, Clara Morgan said. And there's a name in the front of it. She turned it around, and Nathan Brooks looked at the flyleaf of a book that had been under a floor in a store for God knows how long, and read in his own mother's handwriting, Nathan Brooks. From Mother, 1859. He sat down on the floor. Nathan. That's mine. Nathan what? That's mine, Clara. He couldn't get air. That's the one. That's the one I put the letter in. That's the one I gave your daddy in the road in 71. Clara Morgan said, That's not possible. Ma'am. That's not possible. Nathan, that Bible's been on our shelf for 22 years. I dusted it. And Silas Crow said, Miss Morgan, have you ever opened it? Nobody breathed. Clara Morgan stood in that store with a book in her hands and said, No. Ma'am, I've never opened it, she said slowly. Not once. 22 years. Then how do you know what's on your shelf? And Clara Morgan said, Oh God. She sat down. He swapped it, she said. Ma'am, he swapped it. Her voice was going. Mr. Crow, he swapped it. Sometime, God, sometime in the last 19 years, that man walked into my father's house and took a Bible off a shelf and put a different one in its place, and my father never opened it, and I never opened it, and we dusted around a stranger's book for 20 years. Nathan Brooks said, Why? Everybody turned. Why? Nathan Brooks said again. Clara, why, what's in it? It's a note. It's a suicide note from 11 years ago with 2 names on it. What's that worth to a man building a railroad? And Silas Crow said, Nothing. That's what I've been sitting on for 2 hours, Crow said. Mr. Brooks, it's worth nothing. It's not evidence of a thing. There's no ledger in it. There's no names. There's no land. It's a dead woman's name in a dead man's handwriting, and it can't hurt him, and it never could. Then why'd he take it? Sir, why'd he take it, Crow? And Silas Crow said, Because he couldn't throw it away. Nathan Brooks stood up. No. Sir? No. That's Crow, that's not enough. A man doesn't walk into a house and swap a Bible off a shelf because he collects things. Nathan, Clara Morgan said. That's not a reason, that's not... Nathan. He turned. Clara Morgan was sitting on the floor of that store with the Bible open in her lap, and her whole face had gone to nothing. There's writing in it, she said. What? There's writing in it. Her hands were shaking. In the back. There's Nathan. There's about 40 pages of it. Clara. It's not my father's hand, she said. Nathan Brooks came across that store. It's not yours either, Clara Morgan said. He knelt down, and Nathan Brooks looked at 40 pages of the most beautiful handwriting he had ever seen in his life, going back page after page after page in 11 different inks over what had to be 9 years, and at the top of the first page in that same perfect hand, to Mrs. Sarah Brooks. Nathan Brooks made a sound. Nathan. He couldn't. Nathan. And Silas Crow reached down and took that book out of his hands and read the first line out loud, because somebody had to. Sarah, I have carried your husband's letter for 9 years, and I am going to tell you what I did. The store went absolutely silent. Silas Crow kept reading. His voice was shaking, and he did not stop. I found him in a road in 1871, and he was going to the river. I knew it. I looked at him, and I knew it in about 4 seconds, and I have known that look my whole life. And I did not stop him, Sarah. That is the first thing, and it is the truest thing. A man was going to the river, and I stood in a road, and I did not stop him. Clara Morgan put both hands over her mouth. I told him to give it away, Silas Crow read. That is what I did. I said, son, if you are going to do it, don't leave anybody a mess. Give it away first. And he looked at me, and he said, all right. Nathan Brooks whispered, that's not what happened. He went down that road, and he gave a Bible to a farmer. Silas Crow read, and the farmer grabbed his hand and would not let go, and I watched it from 400 yards, and I have thought about it every day for 11 years. That's not because he did not go to the river Sarah. He went home. And I have spent 11 years trying to understand what happened in that road, and I have got exactly one answer, and it is this. Somebody said, thank you. Nathan Brooks was on his knees. And I have not been able to throw this book away, Silas Crow read, and I have not been able to burn it, and I have carried it to 4 hotel rooms, and I have read your husband's letter about 900 times, and Sarah, I am going to tell you the thing I have never told a soul. He stopped. Read it, Nathan Brooks said. I have got no wife. Silas Crow read. I have got no boy. I built a store in this valley in 1842 when I was 19 years old, and I have sat by that stove for 40 years, and I have watched 400 people come in and out that door, and not one of them has ever once asked me a single question about myself. Nobody breathed. Not one Sarah. 40 years. They ask about the flower. They ask about the mail. They ask me how old I am, and I tell them a different number every time to see if anybody notices, and nobody ever has. Clara Morgan was sobbing. And in 1871, I stood in a road, and I watched a man get told thank you and go home and live. Silas Crow read, and I went back to my store, and I sat down in my chair, and Sarah, I hated him. The store was silent for 11 seconds. I hated your husband, Silas Crow read. That is what I am. That is the whole man. I hated a boy who had lost everything on God's earth because somebody grabbed his hand in a road, and I have never had one single person grab mine. Nathan Brooks put his face in his hands. So I went up that canyon in April, and I stood over your grave, and I told him not to let anybody thank him. Clara Morgan said, Oh God, I want you to understand I knew exactly what I was doing. Silas Crow read. I was not confused. I was not drunk. I stood over a dead woman, and I looked at her husband, and I took the one thing that saved him, and I took it away, and I have watched him ride around this valley in the dark for 11 years, and I have never once been sorry. Nathan Brooks stood up. He was shaking so hard, he had to put a hand on the counter. Read the last page, he said. Sir, read the last page, Crow. Silas Crow turned to the back of that book, and his face changed. It's dated, he said. When? The 8th of December, Silas Crow said. 1882. Clara Morgan stood up. That's the day my father mailed the letter, she said. Silas Crow read it. Sarah, a letter came in the sack today. It is from Tom Morgan, and it is to your husband, and it says he is coming Tuesday, and it says he is going to say your name on that porch. Nobody moved. 9 years I have had those letters, 9 Aprils. I have taken every one of them out of that sack and rode 11 miles up a canyon and put them in your boy's room. Because I knew he would never open that door, and Sarah, I read every single one first. Clara Morgan's hand went to her mouth. And they were about the girl. Everyone. 9 years of a man writing to a stranger about his daughter because he had got nobody else to tell, and I read them at my stove. And Sarah, I want you to know something. Silas Crow's voice broke. They were the best part of my year, too. Nathan Brooks sat down on the floor. I have read 9 years of another man's mail. Silas Crow read, and I have been happier reading it than I have been in 40 years of living, and on Tuesday it stops. Because on Tuesday he drives up that canyon, and he knocks on that door, and your husband opens it, and then they have got each other, and I have got a stove. Nobody in that store could speak. So I am going to go out on that road tomorrow. Silas Crow read. And then he stopped. That's it, he said. What? That's the last line. It stops. The rest is blank. Nathan Brooks said, Read it again. Sir, read that last line again. So I am going to go out on that road tomorrow. Silas Crow read. And Nathan Brooks said, That's not a confession. Everybody turned. That's not a confession, he said again. Crow, look at it. He wrote 9 years of the ugliest thing I've ever heard a man say, and he stopped at, I'm going to go out on that road tomorrow. Sir, he didn't write it down, Nathan Brooks said. 40 pages, and he couldn't write down the one thing. The marshal said, Then we've got nothing. Everybody turned. He was 39 years old, and his name was Pike, and he'd been standing in that store for 2 hours, listening to a book, and he took his hat off. I'm sorry, he said. I'm real sorry. But son, that's a diary. That's 40 pages of a lonely old man being ugly about you, and there's not one crime in it. Not one. He never says he shot anybody. He never says he filed anything. He never even says he knew Crow. Silas Crow said, I'll say it. Mr. Crow, you're a confessed? I'll say it. Silas Crow said. You'll say it from a cell, Pike said. And every lawyer in Boise City will have you for lunch by noon, and I'd rather cut my own hand off than tell you that, but it's true. Nathan Brooks stood up. Where is he? Son. Marshal, where is he? And Pike said, He's sitting in the back. Nobody had asked. That was the thing. 11 men had come up that road with a warrant at 6 in the morning, and Hollis Tanner had opened the door in his nightshirt and said, Come in, boys, coffee's on. And he had been sitting in a chair in the back of his own store for 2 hours, while they took his floor apart. He had not said one word. He had not asked for a lawyer. Nathan Brooks walked back there, and Hollis Tanner looked up and said, Hello, son. Don't, Nathan. Don't call me that. Hollis Tanner sat there. All right, he said, and Nathan Brooks stood in front of a man he had known 11 years and could not say one single thing. 40 seconds, a minute. You read them, Nathan Brooks said finally. Yes. 9 years. Yes. You read a man's letters to me for 9 years, and you never gave me one. Yes, Hollis Tanner said. Why? And Hollis Tanner said, Because they were mine. Nathan Brooks put his hand on the wall. They weren't yours. No, Hollis Tanner agreed. They were mine, Hollis. He wrote them to me. Yes. He wrote, Am I doing this right, and put it in your sack, and you read it at your stove. Yes. And he was asking me, Nathan Brooks said. He was asking me, and I was 11 miles up a canyon, and I'd have Hollis. I'd have written him back. I'd have written him back that same day. He wanted to know if he was doing it right, and I'd have said yes. I'd have said yes. I had a boy, Hollis. I had a boy for 4 years, and that's the only thing I ever... He stopped. He couldn't. And Hollis Tanner said, I know. You know. That's why I kept him, Hollis Tanner said. Nathan Brooks turned around. Say that again? Nathan, say that again. And Hollis Tanner said, Because you'd have answered. The store went absolutely silent. Clara Morgan was standing in that doorway, and she had both hands over her mouth. That's the whole thing, Hollis Tanner said. That's the 19 years. You want it? Here it is. I took the first one in 73, and I read it at my stove, and I thought, well, this fella's going to write back. And then there'd be 2 of them. Hollis. And I'd have a store, Hollis Tanner said. Nathan Brooks could not speak. "That's it," Hollis Tanner said. "That's the arithmetic. 19 years, 9 letters. I did it the first time because I couldn't stand it, and I did it the next 8 times because I'd already done it once, and that's how everything works, son. That's how every ugly thing on this earth works, and don't let anybody tell you different." Nathan Brooks said, "Did you shoot him?" Hollis Tanner did not answer. Hollis: "Nothing." "Did you shoot Thomas Morgan?" And Hollis Tanner said, "You know I did." Marshal Pike came 4 steps into that room. "Mr. Tanner." "Hush." Hollis. Tanner said, and Pike hushed, and later he could not explain that to anybody either. "Say it," Nathan Brooks said. Nathan: "You've been sitting in that chair 2 hours, and you haven't asked for a lawyer, and you told a marshal to hush," Nathan Brooks said. "Say it." And Hollis Tanner said, "I shot Tom Morgan on the 9th of December on the Canyon Road because he was coming up here to say your wife's name on your porch, and I could not stand it." Nobody breathed. "That's it," Hollis Tanner said. "That's the whole crime. There's no railroad in that sentence. There's no land. There's no 41 names and no 31 deeds and no book under a floor." He looked up and his eyes were absolutely clear. "I killed a man because he was going to be happy on Tuesday." Clara Morgan made a sound. "Ma'am," Hollis Tanner said, "I'm sorry. Don't. I'm not asking you for anything." "Don't you dare." "I'm not asking you for anything, Miss Morgan," Hollis Tanner said. "I've never asked anybody for anything in my life. That's the entire trouble. That's the whole 61 years. He stood up. Pike had a hand on his gun, and Hollis Tanner didn't look at him. "Nathan?" "Don't." "Son, I've got one thing and then I'll go." "I don't want it." "I know you don't," Hollis Tanner said. "Take it anyway." Nathan Brooks stood there. "He drove past 4 houses," Hollis Tanner said. "Mom." Nathan Brooks looked up. "What?" "On the 9th, with a hole in him." Hollis Tanner's face had not changed once in 2 hours, and it changed now. "I shot him at 4 in the afternoon on the Canyon Road, and I stood there and watched him get back on that wagon, and I thought, well, that's it. He's going home. Or he's going to Rainey's. Or he's going to the Ferris place. There's 4 lamps between him and you, son, and he was 58 years old with a bullet in his chest." Nobody moved. "And he drove past every one of them," Hollis Tanner said. His voice broke. "He drove past everyone," he said. "In the dark. 11 miles. Up a canyon. To a door that don't open." He put both hands over his face. "And I sat on that road and watched him go, and I have not slept 1 hour since." Nathan Brooks said, "Why'd you take the Bible?" Hollis Tanner didn't answer. "You walked up on him in the snow," Nathan Brooks said. 2 days later, and he was laying on his daughter, and you never saw her, and you took a Bible out of a box and left a dish towel, and Hollis, why? And Hollis Tanner said, "Because he'd have got there." The store went silent. "He'd have got there," Hollis Tanner said. "That's what I figured out standing over him. He'd have made it. Another hour, maybe 2. He was 4 miles out and he was going to make it. Nathan and I shot him at 4 in the afternoon, and he was still 4 miles from your gate at 9 o'clock at night 2 days later, and that means he stopped. He stopped for Clara." "He stopped for Clara," Hollis Tanner agreed. "He stopped and got down in that snow and laid on top of that girl and quit driving, and he had 4 miles left, and he gave 'em up." He wiped his face. "So I took the book," Hollis Tanner said, "because if he wasn't going to get there, then nobody was. And I was not going to leave your wife's name in a box in the snow for the wolves." Yes. Nathan Brooks sat down on a nail keg. That's not what? "That's not ugly," Nathan Brooks said. And Hollis Tanner said, "No, it ain't." He put his hat on. "That's the thing about it, son," Hollis Tanner said. "That's the thing nobody ever tells you. It's never all ugly. It's about 9/10 ugly, And there's 1/10 in there that's the realest thing you ever felt, and that's the part that gets you. That's the part you can't put down. He walked past Nathan Brooks. He stopped at the door. 19 years, Hollis Tanner said, and the only clean thing I ever did was carry a book out of the snow. Teg. They hung him in Boise City in June. Clara Morgan went. Nathan Brooks did not, and they had one fight about it, and it was the only fight they ever had. You should come. No. Nathan. Ma'am, I'm not going to stand in a square and watch a man die because he was lonesome, Nathan Brooks said. I've been lonesome 11 years. I'm not going to stand there and be glad. And Clara Morgan said, Then who's going to say his name? What? Nathan Brooks stopped. What? Nathan. She had her hand on the door. There's 400 people going to that square and every one of them's going to say Tanner. Every one. That's Tanner, that's the man from the store, that's the one shot Morgan. Her voice was shaking. And that's not his name. That's a store. Clara, nobody's ever asked him a question, Clara Morgan said. That's what he wrote. 40 years and 400 people, and not one of them ever asked him one thing about himself. And I read that page 11 times, Nathan, and I've decided something and I want you to hear it, and then I'll go. What? And Clara Morgan said, It's not an excuse, it's just true. She was gone 9 days. When she came back, she got down off that wagon and she stood in Nathan Brooks's yard and she said, I asked him. Clara. I sat in that cell for 4 hours the night before, she said, and I asked him. You asked him what? And Clara Morgan said, I asked him where he was born. Nathan Brooks put his hand over his mouth. He cried for 11 minutes. Clara Morgan said, That's all I did. That's the whole thing. I sat down on a stool in a cell and I said, Mr. Tanner, where were you born? And he cried for 11 minutes and he could not get one word out. Clara. Kentucky, she said. Same as my daddy. 40 miles apart. He was born in 1821 and he came out in 42 and he was 19 years old and he built a store. Nathan Brooks could not speak. And you know what he said at the end? Clara Morgan said. What? And Clara Morgan said, That's the first time anybody's asked me that in 61 years. The ranch came back in September. It took a territorial court, and Silas Crow's testimony from a cell in Boise City and 41 families in a courtroom, and the thing that did it in the end was the smallest thing. Anybody had a signature on the back of a deed dated the 12th of November, and a letter postmarked the 8th of December in the same hand, and a 58-year-old man's own words, I have not read past the first line, and I never will. The judge held that letter for a long time. Mr. Crow, he said, you sat at this man's table. Yes, sir. And you asked him to sign the back of his own deed. Yes, sir. Did he read it? And Silas Crow said, No, sir. He trusted me. The judge took off his glasses. Mr. Crow, he said, in 11 years on this bench, I have never once had a man in your position say that sentence out loud. No, sir, Silas Crow said. I imagine not. 31 ranches went back. Not all of them. 4 families were gone, and 2 men were dead, and 1 was in Oregon and would not answer a letter. But 24 families came back up that mountain in the spring of '83, and Nathan Brooks was in the yard of every single one of them, and he did not ride off, and every one of them said thank you, and he stood there and took it every time. Silas Crow did 9 years. He came out in '91, and he came straight back to that valley which nobody expected, and he walked into a courtroom in Boise City the next spring on behalf of a widow in Salmon City, and he did it for free, and he did that for 19 more years. And when he died in 1910, there were 400 people at the funeral, and every one of them had a piece of ground because of him. Nobody ever forgave him. He never asked. They were married in October. It was a small thing. Del Rainey stood up with him, and Ruth Rainey made the cake, and there were 41 families in that yard, which was every single house above the valley, and Ollie Ferris cried like a baby, and Clara Morgan understood at last why her father had cried at weddings for 19 years. They were on the porch that night late after. "Nathan." "Ma'am?" "Why'd you take me?" He didn't answer. "In the snow," Clara Morgan said. "You said I can't. 3 times. And then you did it. And I've been 11 months trying to figure out what changed, and I want you to tell me." And Nathan Brooks said, "You hit me." She sat up. "What? You came awake and you thought I was the one who shot him, and you went for me with both hands." His voice was very quiet. "And I got your wrists, and you were about 110 pounds, and you were fighting ma'am. Over a dead man. In 20 below at 9 o'clock at night." "Nathan." "I hadn't seen anybody fight for anything in 11 years, Nathan Brooks said. Clara Morgan put her hand over her mouth. "That's it?" he said. "That's the whole thing. Your daddy said take her 3 times, and I said no 3 times, and then a girl in the snow hit me in the face because she thought I'd hurt her father." He wiped his eyes with the back of his wrist. "And I thought, well, hell, there's somebody still fighting." She cried for a while. Then she said, "Nathan." "Yeah." "Read me the letter." "Clara." "Not the whole thing." She was holding his hand with both of hers. "The first line. I've never heard you say the first line." And Nathan Brooks took out a piece of paper 11 years old and soft as cloth, and he did not need to look at it. "To whoever finds me," he said. "My wife's name was Sarah, and my boy's name was Sam, and I would like them said out loud at least once more before I'm forgotten." Clara Morgan said, "Sarah, Sam." Nathan Brooks said, "Thomas Morgan." And they sat there in the dark and said 4 names back and forth on that porch until they couldn't anymore, and there was nobody to hear it, and it did not matter one bit because they were saying them to each other. 19 years a man drove down a mountain every spring to say 2 words to a stranger. He never found him. He died in the snow 4 miles short with his daughter under his coat, and he gave up 4 miles, the last 4, the ones that would have gotten him there, because getting there was worth less to him than she was. That's the whole story. A man in a store took 19 years of other people's letters because nobody had ever written him one. A man in a canyon rode away from 41 porches for 11 years because somebody told him kindness was a debt. And a girl in the snow hit a stranger in the face and put a dead man's last 2 words into the only hands in Idaho that would honor them. Thomas Morgan never got to say thank you. He didn't have to. He'd already said it in 1871, in a road with both hands, and he would not let go. And that thank you kept a man alive for 11 years. And that man kept 41 families alive, and 10 of those families kept their ground by saying his name out loud in their own kitchens to a man with a pen. 1 thank you. That's all it was. That's all it ever is. And Nathan Brooks, who was told on the worst day of his life that letting people love him would cost him everything, spent the next 40 years finding out that it was the only thing he ever owned